I do. Why is this not working? What the fuck? Did they change this shit? What are you guys doing to me? This is all different and all new. Oh, man. Unbelievable. Why do they make it so difficult? I said I'm gonna see you again. And you ain't never gonna change. Test, test, test. Can you guys hear me out there? We are about to begin the webinar. If you can hear me, tell me where you are in the chat. I would love to know where you guys are logging in from. Cool. Hey guys. Oh yeah, excellent. Everybody's popping up now here. We got Nevada City. We've got Chile. Oh yeah, buenos dias, amigo. All right, hold on a second. I gotta mute the sound on my laptop here because I'm getting a feedback loop. Oh, hey, Palm. How's it going, man? Good to see you. Oh, this is really cool. I'm super stoked to see you guys here. Um, it's a little stress of my first webinar, to be honest with you, so it feels a little weird to be talking without any feedback, but that's okay. I've got my Let me show you the setup that I've got going on here. I'm talking to you from my office in Mammoth Lakes, California. So I got my laptop here with a live stream and chat window. This is the view out my office window right now. Hopefully you guys can see how much snow we've got here. I'm trying to survive until the springtime. So let's get that back in view there. All right. Oh, this is great. This is great. Okay. So just want to double check. It sounds like everybody can still hear me pretty well, right? Do I need to get any closer to the microphone or back up? I think the sound's probably pretty good, yeah? All right, I'm just going to do some final checks here to make sure everything's in place for the webinar. And then I want to make sure that I can toggle back and forth between myself and let's see what happens here. Am I breaking stuff? Probably. Hey everybody, thanks for logging in. Wow, there's a ton of people on here. I'm not exactly sure how many people are going to be attending the webinar. Okay, great, great. We got everybody. We got everything working here. I'm not sure how many people are going to be attending, but we had, oops, we had over 1,000 people actually register. The last count as of this morning was 1,040 people registered for this seminar, which is totally mind-boggling to me. I can't believe that that many people want to listen to what I have to say. But that's super cool. I'm really stoked. So, all right, man, everybody's still logging in. This is so cool. We've got people. Oh, we've got a bunch of people from Chile. That's three individual people from Chile that I've seen. Let's see who else we've got. We've got Giuseppe from Italy. Buenos dias, igualmente. Fantastic. We got LA, Bermuda, Las Vegas. Jim from Libertyville. Hey, Jim, how are you, man? Good to hear from you. Germany, Lofoten, Norway. What's the weather like up there in Lofoten? Is it cold right now? I'm not sure it's colder than California. It was last night, I think it was minus 15 C here. So how cold is it in Lofoten? We got Denmark, Amsterdam. Oh, this is great. Sean, bonjour. That's my terrible French accent. Kiwi in France. Sue from Healdsburg. Duluth, Minnesota. I bet Minnesota takes the cake for coldest right now. Niagara Falls. Christoph. Oh my gosh. Hugh Mobley, how's it going, man? I remember you from back in the day of doing a bunch of photo critiques on Pro Photo Tips. Pierre and Mario and Joseph and Steve-O, what's going on? Yakima, Washington. Carmen from Charlottesville. Yvonne from Chile. Uh, Man, there's so many people on here. This is so awesome. Really, really stoked to see you guys. Okay, so South Norway is minus 8 C and fresh snow, he says. Yeah, it's about the same as here. Hey, Gabby, you made it. Fantastic. I'm glad we got that worked out. Did everybody, or did anybody have problems with that timer on the webinar page? I heard a bunch of different weird things about the timer displaying in local time. It should have only been in California like Pacific Standard Time. I mean, I don't know what it was doing. It was supposed to just be counting down to now, but apparently it was counting down to 11 a.m. in everybody's time zone. So people who are in Australia, for example, logged on thinking that the webinar was yesterday. And everybody's like panicking that they missed it. So sorry about that. The timer got all messed up, which is a bit of a bummer, but it looks like we still have a ton of people here. So let's see. Hopefully, if you refresh the page, then it should be totally good now because the timer should be gone, and it should just be me talking to you. Oops, I think I broke things. Hold on. Let's get that going again. There we go. Okay, so let's see here. Okay, so looks like yeah, so there are a lot of people called Anon on here. You can hit down in the lower right part of the chat box. There's or when you log in, you can specify just a temporary name so that you don't have to go by Anon. I'd love to see your actual names. So, hey guys, hello from Greece, aloha from Honolulu, Chilliwack, British Columbia, Newcastle, England. Man, this is so cool. We got a whole international community tuning in here to learn about landscape photography and grand landscapes. So, I am really, really excited about this, you guys. This is, if you're just joining us, this is the first time I've actually done a webinar. Um, so it's been an interesting struggle to get all the technology working and have all the moving parts integrated. The streaming software integrating, I'm hosting it through YouTube and integrated with that, integrate with the website, integrated with the timers, integrating with all the emails that have been going out. I've had to be manually adding a bunch of people to the emails. It should have been automatic. It's been a frantic couple of days, but we're coming down to the final minutes here. Let's see, what's the official time? 10:55. So we got about 5 more minutes until we get going. I'm just going to keep seeing where everybody's calling in from. We got Fernley, Nevada, Boston, Aurora, Colorado, Champaign, Illinois, Jenny from Australia. Whoa, it's got to be early in Australia. Maryland, Virginia, Paul from Wales, Leipzig, LA, Bethesda, Maryland, Santa Cruz. What's up, Shay? How you doing, man? New Hampshire, Northern Colorado, New South Wales, Australia. Man, this is great. There's so many people here from around the world. Incredible. Now, I want to know who's been out photographing this past week. Who's taken their camera out of their bag and who's gone out shooting. I have to put my own hand down, unfortunately. I've been locked in the office getting everything ready for this webinar and for my course launch, which I'm going to tell you guys a little bit about more later, which also launched today. Okay, wow. Kim, I don't know how many people are on here exactly. We did have, at last count, 1,040 people register for the webinar, but I don't know how many, I don't have a way to track, unfortunately, how many people are going to be able to actually join, but I'm hoping at least a few hundred on here. But the world is a big place and there's lots of room for all of us, so this is great. Yeah, everybody's been shooting. That's awesome. 5 days in Moab. Man, it's so beautiful out there. Learning star trails. Let's see here. Wildlife photography in Yellowstone. Oh, that's cool. How's that been? Shay's been spending 3 weeks, 3 weekends in Yosemite. We've got apparently lots of snow in France going on for Sean. That's cool. But Palm is he's headed to NorCal, or excuse me, to Death Valley next weekend. Man, that is awesome. 283 people. Oh, that's how many people have logged in on the chat box. Yeah, so we have 298 people, 299 people logged in on the chat at this moment. That is crazy. That is nuts. You guys frickin' rock. I love it. Thank you so much for joining. This is so cool. I'm really excited. Like I said, this is the first time I've done one of these, and to have 298 people join. Now it's probably going to be higher. That's just the number of people logged in on the chat window. You don't actually have to be logged in on the chat to watch the webinar. So my guess is we have a few more. Michael, just back from the Eastern Sierra and Death Valley. That is fantastic, man. It's my favorite place in the entire world. That's where I live. So I love this area. The Iditarod ceremonial start. This is so cool. There are so many neat things going on in the world of photography that you guys are doing. Oh, hey, Marcia, how are you? Hey, Claude. Oh, Sean Ryan from the Bay Area. We still got a bunch of people logging in. So let's see. I am going to go ahead and give it the full 2 more minutes until 11 a.m. And then we're going to get cracking because there is a ton of information. I went through the webinar last night for about the 2nd or 7th time, and it is jam-packed and it's going to be action-packed. So we're going to have to be flying through there because there's a ton of stuff to get through. But I think you guys are going to really enjoy it. There is a lot of information. Oh, I'm curious. How many people have downloaded the 9 Steps to More Epic Grand Landscapes ebook that I put out? Just let me know in the chat if you've downloaded that. This is based roughly around that ebook, but it goes into so much more depth, incredible amount of depth in each of those topics to really give a massive understanding of why all those things are so important. So I hope you guys really enjoy this. Cool. Yeah, a lot of people have downloaded it. Fantastic. Michael downloaded, but it hasn't had a chance to go through it, so no worries, because we're going to go through everything in that book kind of times 10 today. It's going to be sweet. So let's go ahead and I'm going to get things rolling here because it is officially, according to my computer, it is officially 11 a.m. So let me switch over to the presentation. Okay, so this should pop up here in a second. Can you guys please let me know that you are seeing this? All right, sweet. Looks like it's popping up there on the screen. Okay, awesome. You guys, this is the most responsive audience. I freaking love it. Okay, cool. So it's 11:01. Let's go ahead and dive in. Welcome everybody, to everybody who's on the chat. We have 340 of you on the chat right now, probably even more people not on the chat. That is absolutely mind-boggling to me. It blows my mind. But welcome to my very first and my very best webinar, the 9 Essentials of Epic Grand Landscape Photos. So the goal of this webinar, I really want you guys to be able to take better photos today. So my promise to you is that in the next 90 minutes, you're going to learn a practical framework for creating epic grand landscape photos. Photos kind of like these. This is a photo from the High Sierra near where I live. This is another photo from the Eastern Sierra Nevada. This is another photo from the Eastern Sierra Nevada, and you guessed it, another photo from the Eastern Sierra Nevada. So you don't actually have to go to the Eastern Sierra Nevada to take epic grand landscape photos, but it is an amazing place if you want to do that. Okay, a practical frame. What am I talking about there? So it turns out that virtually every grand landscape photograph is built from the same 9 essential parts, and that's true even of photos that look totally different. You might say that this photo looks different than this photo, but believe it or not, they are built from the same parts. So if you understand what those parts are, you can easily create killer landscape photographs wherever you go. And that's exactly what you're going to learn today. So I would love to see a quick poll. Let me know in the chat box who among you looks at photos on Instagram or an Outdoor Photography magazine or on 500px, and you're totally blown away on one hand, but on the other hand, you're completely frustrated because your photos don't look like those photos. So let me know if that's ever happened to you, because that certainly happened to me when I was first learning how to take grand landscape photographs. I was incredibly frustrated. So let's figure out if you're in the right place here today. Is this webinar right for you? The answer is yes, if you are frustrated. If you don't know why your photos. That's awesome. Michael says that's my life. Yes. So if you don't know why your photos don't look like those in the magazines, if you can't get your photos sharp from front to back, if you don't get the color, light, or detail you want in a photo, if you let your camera make more decisions about your photography than you do, and if you don't know how to tell if you have a good composition or if something should even be in your frame or not, if you don't know how to direct your viewer's attention, if you don't know which lens to use and why, if you want to learn how to turn your artistic vision into a photograph, or if you just don't say wow when you look at your own photos, if any of this applies to you, then you are in the right place and we're going to fix all of your problems, right? Well, maybe not all of your problems, but at least some of your landscape photography problems right now. Okay, so what are we going to learn today? In the next 60 to 90 minutes, we're going to go through, you're going to gain a step-by-step approach to creating beautiful landscape photos like those you see in the magazines. And that includes how to find the best kinds of foregrounds, how to get a scene in focus from front to back, lens selection, purpose, and intent. And I'll get into what exactly that means. I'm going to give you some practical, surefire approaches to composition, how to tell your story of a landscape by choosing the foreground, midground, and background elements. I'm going to teach you how to pull your viewer into the frame and lead them on a visual journey. We'll talk about when and where to shoot. Then I'm going to give you a really simple secret behind creating a painterly feel with the light and exposure of your images. We're also going to talk about choosing the perfect camera settings for your scene to show your artistic vision, as well as one of the most important, some of the most important post-processing steps you can take to make your images pop. And we're also going to talk about the secret to happiness. Just kidding, I only want to see who's paying attention. Although, you know, if your landscape photography gets better, that is kind of a secret to happiness. So I would really, really like to oh, good call, Debbie. Debbie said she didn't realize she had to click the play button to get the webinar started. So if you're out there trying to figure out what's happening, click play on the YouTube button. So press play to get the webinar started. Okay, just a moving circle had you at the beginning, a white circle. It's probably an internet buffering problem there, Jonna. So I would just refresh the page and try again. Okay, great. So please put away your phone and any other distractions because I'm going to go through this. I'm not really going to have time to slow down or stop or go back. And so if you're distracted, you miss something, I can't really go back because there's too much to go through. And get something to take notes with. So here's a game plan. Basically, we're going to take about 60 minutes, it might go a little bit longer, to talk about those 9 essentials of epic grand landscapes. Then I want to take about 20 minutes, and I'm going to show you guys an insider's peek at my brand new signature landscape video course that just launched today. And the reason that I want to do that is because if you like today's webinar, you're going to love that course. It's basically this webinar on steroids. It's called 10 Techniques to Transform Your Landscapes. And just so we're totally upfront at the beginning, I have an offer for people on the webinar. We'll get to that at the end. But basically, I'm going to have an offer for you guys if you enroll in the course to earn up to, or to gain $688 in totally free bonuses. And then after that, we'll spend 15-30 minutes doing Q&A. Okay, so before we get into all of the topics of the seminar, why don't I spend a little bit of time telling you about myself, aka why the heck should you listen to me, in case you're not familiar with who I am or what I do. So I'm a full-time professional landscape photographer, which means that I earn 100% of my income from doing photography in some way, whether that's selling prints, doing licensing, contract work, teaching workshops, or selling courses. I am a contract photographer for Nikon, and what that means is whenever they have a new camera or a new lens, they'll call me up and ask me to go shoot promo images for it. So for example, when the Nikon D750 came out back in 2014, they hired me to do all the global promo shoots for that camera. When the Nikon 8 to 15 millimeter fisheye lens came out, they sent me an advance copy. I went down to Chile, to Patagonia, to southern Patagonia, to photograph for the global marketing campaign for that lens. And I have another wide angle project that I can't talk about. It never saw the light of day, but suffice it to say, when Nikon needs a landscape guy, I'm one of the dudes that they call. But maybe more importantly for you guys today on the webinar is that I've been teaching photography for the past 9 years. So that started out as workshops, simple one day down at the coast, and that's blossomed now to global workshops, up to 14-day tours in places like New Zealand and California. I'll be doing an Africa tour coming up next year, most likely. I also teach at a lot of conferences, and I speak at trade shows. Of course, I have my YouTube channel, and I hope a lot of you guys know me from YouTube. We're just about to hit 300,000 subscribers on YouTube, which is mind-boggling to me. And of course, I produce online courses that people seem to really like the one I'm going to tell you about later today. And so I could talk about myself for a long time, but maybe I can let Judy, who sent me an email recently, totally unsolicited email, kind of tell it. She said, I want to say thank you very much for making yourself and your wise and practical knowledge so easily available to people like me. It has been life-changing. I don't know if that's true, but thank you, Judy, for saying that. Despite many private classes with skilled photographers, there were always knowledge gaps. It has been your website that has created the confidence that I too can do this. You have taken away the mystery of the camera that I happily paid several months' salary for. So people seem to enjoy the way that I teach. I hope that you guys really enjoy the way that I teach today, and I hope that you get a lot out of this seminar. So that being said, why don't we just dive right in, because we got a lot to go through, and forgive me please for speaking quickly today, but I have a lot of information that I need to cover. So what are the 9 essentials of epic grand landscapes? Well, if you've downloaded my ebook, you already know what they are, but I'm going to go through them again right here. The first one is location, location, location. Next, we're going to be talking about lens selection and why we want to use a wide angle lens. Third, we'll talk about foreground, midground, and background elements to tell the story of a place. We're going to be talking about how leading lines create a visual journey, why horizon placement is so important to our landscape photographs, specific camera settings that generally work for grand landscape photos, why it's important to shoot during magic hour, how to create a painterly feel in your photos by darkening the sky and brightening the foreground, and then how to use contrast and saturation in post-processing for incredible amount of pop in your photos. All right, so let's look at all of those things individually. And I just spilled water all over my desk, so hopefully things don't get shorted out. Okay, so location is the first aspect of a grand landscape. And this is incredibly important because not all locations are created equal. Beautiful places are great, but grand landscapes need more than just beauty. They need places that are unique and novel and simple. And the reason for that is one of the best ways to make an interesting photo is to show people something that they haven't seen before. And so if you're photographing a landscape that is well known to your audience, or that a lot of other photographers have photographed, then you're doing yourself a little bit of a disservice because you're not adding anything new to the world of photography. And if you're going to now this is why people love to travel to these exotic places like southern Patagonia and Norway and China and Yosemite Valley, because they're so unique, these incredible landscapes. They show people something they haven't seen before, and that makes your photograph more interesting. Then in terms of simplicity, what I mean by that is the more simple you can distill a landscape down to, the more clarity your photograph is going to have and the more impact it's going to have. So for example, if you're trying to shoot a grand landscape inside of a forest, it's not really going to work because there's too much stuff going on. There's too much chaos. That's not to say you can't create a great photograph in a forest, but it's not going to be a grand landscape with a lot of simplicity. So the other thing that a grand landscape needs is some kind of visual payoff in the background. And something that provides a sense of place. And we're going to talk a lot more about this in a little bit. And the reason that I say wide open spaces here is because you want your landscape to be open enough that the visual journey can happen from the front of the frame to the back of the frame. If you have a bunch of stuff that is interfering with that visual journey, again, like if you're shooting in a forest, then your viewer, their eye is never going to land on that visual payoff in the background. So places that don't work really well for grand landscapes are places like forests, like we just talked about. Oceans are just okay, and we'll talk about why. And vistas are also kind of meh for reasons that I'll get into. So let's take a look at what kind of places are good for grand landscapes. Well, places kind of like this. You can see that this location, it's in the eastern Sierra Nevada. I guess that's probably not a surprise to you guys at this point. But you can notice how the landscape is very unique and novel. This is a place that not a lot of people get to see, so it's quite interesting because of that. It's simple, right? There is a lot of stuff here, but it's a simple landscape, and it allows the visual journey to take place from the front of the frame all the way through to the back of the frame. There's nothing obscuring those mountains in the background, and there's a very well-defined sense of place because that mountain is very unique and very recognizable. Here's another example from New Zealand. You can see how there's this visual payoff in the background, these enormous mountains. Now you have this big, beautiful foreground element that draws you into the frame, and there's nothing in the midground that blocks that visual journey from the front of the photo to the back of the photo. So this is the perfect kind of location for a grand landscape. Now, by contrast, a forest, like we talked about, this was shot with a wide-angle lens, which is one of those critical elements for grand landscapes. But why doesn't this look like a grand landscape? Because there's so much stuff going on. There's a lot of visual chaos. There is not a clear visual flow through the photo, and there's no visual payoff in the background. You can't traverse through this photo to end at some big, beautiful view. Okay, so why is it that oceans don't work well for grand landscapes? Well, it's because as beautiful and interesting as seascape photography can be, they often lack a sense of place, and that's because they're missing that visual payoff in the background. Here you can see we have these beautiful rocky shelves with this really cool channel that runs right through the middle of them that points out to what? Nothing. It points out to the horizon, the empty horizon. Yeah, there's a nice sunset out there, but a sunset doesn't provide a sense of place. So if you're going to shoot seascapes, if you want to shoot the grand landscape type of photograph at the ocean, it's much better if you can find a spot where you have a visual payoff, some sort of thing in the background that provides that sense of place. And what about vistas? Why don't vistas often work for grand landscapes? Well, the reason is that again, that visual payoff. These mountains are huge and spectacular, but you can see that because I shot this from up high, kind of on the level, the same level as the tips of those peaks, they lose some of their majesty. And the other thing that happens is the farther away you get from where I photographed this, the smaller and less prominent those mountains become. That's not to say, again, you can't shoot a beautiful photograph from a vista. It's just not going to be a grand landscape because it doesn't have that big visual payoff in the background. And here, this one in particular is missing a foreground element, which we're going to talk about in a little bit. Okay, so after you've figured out an awesome location for your photograph, the next is lens choice and purpose. And for a grand landscape, generally speaking, you want to go wide, ultra wide, super wide, or ultra super duper wide. And the reason you want to do that is because grand landscape photographs have two big tricks that they use to suck viewers into the photograph. The first one is that they make you feel like you're standing in the scene itself. And the second one is that they punch you in the eyeballs with what's called a visual anchor. And both of those tricks can only be accomplished with a wide or an ultra-wide lens. So why is that? Well, it turns out that wide angles do two things really, really effectively. One is that they bring the foreground right up to the feet of the photographer, and that creates a sense of connection. So this is a really cheesy diagram that I made up the other day. But you can see the difference between the field of view of a wide-angle lens and the field of view of a telephoto lens. That wide-angle lens, the field comes up so closely to where the photographer is standing, that's what makes it feel like you can step right into the frame. Whereas a telephoto, the frame might begin 30, 50, 100, 200 feet away from the photographer, and that creates a lack of connection between you and the image. And the other thing that wide angles do, like I said, is they exaggerate things close to the lens, which helps give your visual anchor impact. And we're going to talk more about this in the foreground element area. So let's take a look at some examples. This was shot at the coast, the Santa Cruz coast, with a 14mm lens. And you can see how that foreground rock wraps right up and sweeps right up underneath you, and it feels like you could literally step into the frame. And that's because those rocks are maybe a foot, maybe 2 feet in front of where my camera was. And it creates this really beautiful sense of connection, like you could just jump right into the photo. You can also see how that wide angle exaggerates those foreground rocks, and it brings them out with this big in-your-face impact, and all of the detail, all of the moss and algae, all that stuff is very, very prominent. By contrast, here's another seascape photo that I shot with a telephoto lens. And yeah, sorry, so we have people asking when it's going to start. Yeah, you just need to press the play button on the screen. Press play. Okay, so you can see here now this telephoto shot. This was shot at about 70mm. You don't feel that connection to the immediate foreground, right? There feels like there's this gulf, this sense of space between you and the background. And that's because the frame starts probably 100 feet away from where I was photographing. So the telephoto lens makes it more like you're an observer of a photograph, and the wide angle lens makes it like you are a participant in the photograph. Here's another example of a telephoto shot from the top of these bluffs, and it was a super fun scene. It was really fun to shoot. It was really beautiful to observe, but you don't feel like you're there, right? You feel like you're looking at a photograph as opposed to standing in a photograph, whereas with that wide angle effect, again, this is a 14mm shot, and those rocks wrap right up underneath you. That sense of perspective makes it feel like you could reach out and touch them. And that's the beauty of using the wide angle lens. All right, so the other thing when it comes down to lens choice and purpose is that you can actually adjust or affect the relationship between your foreground and your background. You can change that based on the focal length and distance to the foreground object. And that's a little jargony, and basically all I really mean is if you're out in a scene and you're photographing with your super ultra duper wide lens, and your foreground element is huge and up in your face, and it's creating this beautiful sense that you can step into the photo. But the problem with wide angle lenses is that they tend to diminish the background. So if you're going, hey, you know, I really like that background and it's appearing just a little bit too small in my frame, well, you can actually affect the relationship between the relative size of the foreground and the background objects by adjusting your focal length and your distance to the foreground object. So let me give you an example that's going to help explain exactly what I mean. All right, so here's a photo that I took of two things, right? My foreground element is this little pine tree, and my background element are those jaggy mountains in the background. And this is cool. I feel like my foreground element has a lot of visual impact here. It feels like I could reach out and touch it. But those mountains in the background, they're so tiny. And in real life, they're not tiny. They're big, beautiful peaks. So how can I make them bigger? Well, all you have to do in a situation like that is take a step or two away from your foreground subject and zoom in a little bit. And you'll see when I do that, all of a sudden that my mountains in the background have gotten twice as big, right? So relative to my foreground, I can make those mountains bigger or smaller depending on exactly where I stand and how much I zoom in, or in this case, zoom out and get closer to make the foreground element more prominent, or step back and zoom in to make the background element more prominent. And you can do this as much as you want. You can continue to step back and zoom in if you really want to make that background element huge, but you have to be aware that the more that you step back from that foreground element and the more that you zoom in, the more you're going to lose that sense of immediate connection that the wide angle provides. Somebody shouts Davenport in the chat. Absolutely. That's one of my most favorite places to shoot seascapes. Okay, so let's talk a little bit about composition. The next 3 points we're going to talk about are all compositionally organized. So you want to tell your story of a landscape, right? And the way that you do that is by choosing a foreground, a midground, and a background element. Because when you're out standing in a location, there are a million things to photograph. So how do you tell your viewer what you think is important? It's by your selection of your foreground, midground, and background element. This is your chance to tell the viewer exactly what you think is cool about a place. And finding those unique elements in the landscape that speak to you is how you tell your story of a place within the context of a larger scene. So in these three elements, the foreground and the background are actually the most important things, because the foreground is the opening hook and the background is the visual payoff. So picking a really strong foreground and a really strong background are the most important parts. Now, having a quality midground is nice to have, but it's a little bit trickier to wrangle, and I'll talk about why that is in just a second. The way that I like to think about my foreground, midground, background selection is as a story. Your foreground is your opening hook. This is how you entice your viewers into the story of your photograph. You want to have a really great opening line. Then the midground is sort of the supporting or the environmental details and action that helps propel the visual story toward the background, which is the finale, that visual payoff. That's where, we'll talk about this more in a second, but that's what your photo is of. And I'll explain more what that means in a few minutes. And then, of course, light is very important. That's icing on the cake, however, and we'll talk more about that later. So I appreciate all the questions that we're getting in the chat. Unfortunately, I'll have a Q&A session at the end. There's so much material to get through right now in the next 60 minutes that I have to just keep blazing through. So hold your questions, re-ask them at the end, and then we'll get answers to all of your questions. Okay, so let's take a look at exactly what I mean by that. Here's a photo from, well, you guys guessed it, the High Sierra. This is pretty close to where I live, and I wanted to tell a story of this place. And so as I was wandering around this basin, there are a million things that I could possibly shoot. And it starts by asking myself, what is interesting to me? What are the things that I like about this scene? And what I found particularly compelling were the Cascades in this area, the big lake, and the mountains in the background. So I chose specifically to put those elements in my photograph to tell my story of this particular place. The rocks and the Cascades, that's my opening hook. That's what I'm using to draw you as the viewer into my photograph. Then the midground, the lake, the meadows, the rocks, the trees, that sort of sets the stage for the photograph. It gives you an environmental context and an awareness of what this place is like. And then the visual payoff are these huge, beautifully corrugated mountains in the background. And you can see that same, even though this photo, these two photos look pretty different, they're made from those same exact building blocks. In this particular case, I've used these bright fuchsia flowers with these puff balls as my opening hook. That's what I'm using to draw you into my story and say, hey, I've got a really cool story to tell you. Boom, here's how it starts. Now in my midground, I have a little bit of forest giving context and environment to the location, and then that visual payoff is that enormous Citadel mountain in the background. That's really what this picture is of. So that's how the story of the grand landscape works. You identify your foreground element, your midground, and your background, and then you line those up. Okay, so let's talk about what makes a great foreground, a great midground, and a great background. So when you're looking for foreground elements, you want to be looking for two main things: contrasts and appropriate size. And I'll talk about exactly what I mean by that. So within the world of contrast, we have three kinds: color contrast, tonal contrast, and textural contrast. I'm going to give you examples of each of those. And then in terms of size, you basically want your foreground element to fill most of the near frame. That's how you know it's the right size. So you want to get low and get close. So if I go back to these photos, you can see that my foreground element, which is the Cascades and the rocks, that fills almost my entire near foreground. And the same story here with these fuchsia flowers filling the entire near foreground of the frame. Okay, so now let's talk about contrast and how you can use those to create a beautiful foreground element for your grand landscapes. So here's an example of what not to do. Don't go out there and just say, hey, I'm shooting a grand landscape. I have to have a foreground. I have to put something in that foreground. So I'm going to pick a dumb little rock like this. Like, don't do that. This rock is a nothing. It's not interesting. You know, I fell into this trap myself of thinking I have to have a foreground element. I have to find something. But I missed out on the larger question of what is interesting to me. This is my story of a place. And if I'm putting something that I particularly find boring in as my foreground, who's going to want to read that story? Who wants a story that says, hey guys, I've got a really killer story for you, but boy, the intro is sure boring. Nobody's going to read that. So you want to avoid that sort of thinking just to, I formulaically have to have a foreground element. It's much better to look around, to really inspect the scene, to try to find something that speaks to you. All right, so let's take a look at examples of good foreground elements. So this is a perfect example of color contrast, right? We've got these bright pink shooting star contrasting with the beautiful deep green of their leaves, and then both of those colors are contrasting with the white of the granite rocks. So you see this foreground just jumps out at you. It's incredibly compelling. The same is true here. We've got these beautiful green grasses, and they're contrasting with the blues and the pinks of this, this stream that are reflected from the sky. So now those are two examples of color contrast. So let's take a look at some tonal contrast. So tonal contrast, what that means is basically a dark element in a white background or a light element in a dark background. And this is just about as clear an example as I can give you. There's a very beautiful dark mudstone rock that's being washed over by the waves here, creating this wonderful tonal contrast that just reaches out and grabs your eyeballs and sucks them into the photo. Here's another example. We have these beautiful dark rocks, but where the water flows over them and picks up some air bubbles, it turns bright white. So that tonal contrast between the dark and the light is what pulls your eye into the frame. Now let's talk about textural contrasts. And what that means is basically when you have a lot of sharp details against a smooth background, or you have something smooth against a background of a lot of sharp details. And this is a photo that exemplifies that perfectly. You have all of these rocks that are just under the surface of the water. But as that pond, as this pool gets deeper and deeper, the detail of the rocks fades out and blends into the sky. So you have this wonderful contrast between the detail of the rocks and the smoothness of the sky that really helps that foreground reach out and grab you. And again, you notice how you feel like you can step right into this frame. It's because the photo, when I was taking it, I was maybe a foot away from these rocks. So they really come up and grab you. Now here's the exact opposite. We've got a very, very, very smooth immediate foreground that is contrasting with the sharp details of the rocks and these beautiful 12-legged sea stars. And in this particular case, I actually manufactured this textural contrast by doing a long exposure. If I had shot this at a 60th of a second, then the water flowing through this area would have a ton of detail, and it would compete with the detail in the rocks, and the foreground wouldn't stand out quite as much. So by putting on a 10-stop filter and slowing this down to about a minute long exposure, I manufactured this textural contrast that makes the foreground pop out better. Here's another example of a textural contrast. We have this reflected texture of the sky against the smooth texture of the sand. Now, as you probably suspect, many, many great foreground elements exhibit all 2 or 3 kinds of contrast. Here, for example, this foreground element, this rock, exhibits color contrast. We have pink against purple, tonal contrast, light against dark, and textural contrast. Again, that textural contrast manufactured by a long exposure. So we have all the sharp detail of the rock against the smooth detail of this lake because it was a long exposure. Here's another example. This rock exhibits texture contrast. We have all those barnacles and nitty-gritty detail against the smoothness of the water. We have some color contrast with that splash of orange light reflected in the top. Now this one doesn't have a ton of tonal contrast, right? The rock and the water, they're kind of around the same brightness value, but those other 2 kinds of contrasts are enough to help this foreground element really pop. So contrast all of that to this photo. It's similar in idea. It's a rock in the foreground, but notice how crappy of a foreground element this really is. Why? Because there's no contrast, right? This foreground rock is basically the same brightness value as the water around it. There's a ton of texture in the water. There's a ton of texture in the rock, so that doesn't come out. And there's almost no color difference, right? The water is kind of darkish brown, and the rock is darkish brown. So there's no contrast. This does not work as a foreground element. How could I have fixed this? Maybe a long exposure to smooth out the water around the rock. That would give me a texture contrast. Maybe that would give me a tonal contrast if the water kind of went misty white. So there are things you can do to improve the contrast of your foreground, but be looking for those contrasts to really make fantastic foreground elements. Okay, so what makes a great midground? All right, so a good midground is anything that gives context to the photo without distracting from the main visual story that starts at the foreground and ends at the background. So like I pointed out in those example photos with good midgrounds, they basically give you these environmental clues of what a landscape is like, but they don't distract from that dominant visual story of the foreground to the background. Now this is often the least controllable element of our composition, because once you've chosen your outstanding foreground and you have your killer background, well, the midground kind of just happens in between those. You can control it to some degree. If you, for example, if I go back all the way here, there were other cascades that I could have chosen right off to the left. So if I had wanted a slightly different midground, I could have picked a different set of cascades, and instead of the lake as my midground, I would have maybe had some boulders as my midground. So you can affect this to some degree, but it is more difficult than the foreground or the background. Now, is it okay to have no midground? Well, of course it is. I mean, this is art, so you should never break any rules ever, right? So let me give you some examples of midground do's and midground don'ts. So here's a photo that has all of the elements of a grand landscape, right? It's got a foreground, these kind of sage brushes, it's got a midground, these trees, and it's got a background, a big mountain that provides a visual payoff. But why does this midground not work? Well, because it's distracting and interfering with the dominant visual story that goes from the foreground to the background. You can see how there's no visual flow from the foreground to that mountain in the background. So that's not to say that this photo isn't nice, but it doesn't work as a grand landscape because it prevents the flow through the environment. By contrast, here's an example of a perfect midground. We have this beautiful foreground, and tell me you guys, what kind of contrast do you see with this foreground element? We got color, tonal, and texture, right? So this is a great foreground. Now we have that big visual payoff in the background, those huge mountains. Now we have a midground that provides a lot of contextual information. It tells us exactly what the environment is like. It's a meadowy area, there's a lake, there's a forest, there's a bunch of cool little tiny trees. So it gives us a lot of clues about what the environment is like without distracting or interfering with that dominant visual story that takes us from the front of the photo to the back of the photo. Now this is a photo that I took in Italy that demonstrates both kinds of midground. So you can see our foreground element is this water, and we flow up, and as we go up through the photo on the right hand side, the midground is quite open, right? And it allows us to traverse all the way to the mountain directly in the back. But on the left, you can see there's that hill with a tree sticking out of it that is standing in front of the mountains in the background. So in that particular case, on that side of the photo, the midground is interfering with the story. So this is a situation where you can, if you're aware of that, you can maybe position yourself in a different spot to find a similar foreground, but utilize a different midground that allows the complete story to unfold. All right, now this is a photo that demonstrates that it's okay to have a grand landscape with almost no midground at all. You can see that this photo is about 50% immediate foreground, about 40% background and sky, and there's just this tiny sliver of trees in the midground. And that's totally okay. Like I said, the most important parts of the photo are the immediate foreground and the background. Now this is a photo, I love this photo, but what's the problem with it? We have this beautiful foreground element, and the mountain in the background there is actually the tallest mountain in Yosemite. It's called Mount Lyell. Would you know that from this photo? No. The reason because those trees in the midground, what are they doing? Not only are they visually more dominant and taller than that mountain, but they're blocking the flow, they're blocking the story from the foreground to the background. So that's something to be aware of when you're choosing your midgrounds. All right, now let's talk about what makes a great background, and I think I got to speed it up a little bit here, you guys. So the bottom line is anything that provides a unique sense of place. That is the critical thing to remember when you're choosing your background elements. Provide a sense of place. This is what your photo is of. When people look at it, they're going to say, hey, that's a really cool photo of your background element. So things that make great background elements are mountains, unique formations. So this is another reason to be extra careful with your seascapes, because if you want a really impactful seascape, you need to provide a sense of place. Now, if you don't have any access to mountains or unique formations or cool seascapey things, you can use light as your background element if you don't have any other choice, but boy, it has to be sensational. All right, so let's look at a couple of examples there. This is Mount Cook in New Zealand, and anybody looking at this would say, hey, that's a picture of Mount Cook. But the truth is, if you look objectively at this frame, Mount Cook occupies what, maybe 5% of the real estate of this photograph? So how can you say this is a photo of Mount Cook? Well, it's because it provides such an iconic sense of place, that it's such a strong background element that it really, really dominates the idea of the photo. And that's what you want to try to find in your background elements. Here's another example from a beach in New Zealand. These beautiful sea stacks provide this sense of place. So you can really, this is a really singular beach, and you know exactly what it is because it has these cool sea stacks. Now this is a seascape photo that has no background element, and although it was a lovely scene and it was fun to shoot, you have no idea where this is, right? This could be California, this could be Spain, this could be New Zealand, this could be Portugal. Where is it? Hint, it's in California. But you don't know that because there's no sense of place, right? So when you're shooting these kinds of things that don't have a strong background element, like I said, you can use light, but the light really, really has to be strong and powerful, kind of like this, just a truly epic sunset, something very, very unique or singular. But you can see how these seascape photos, even with this strong light, don't exhibit as much of a sense of place as something that has a very dominant background subject like these sea stacks or like a big mountain. Okay, so here's my best tip for composition. As you are getting your foreground, midground, and background elements, remember this #1 rule, which is fill the frame with what you like. So you've identified your 3 elements. You want to fill your shot with those elements and get rid of as much of the other stuff as you possibly can. So as you're lining up your photo, ask yourself if you like certain elements that you see in your photo. If not, try to get rid of them, either by shifting your position, adjusting your camera angle, zooming in a little bit, maybe stepping back. And that's really how you're going to tell this simple, powerful, impactful story of an opening hook, some environmental context, and then a background payoff. Okay, next let's talk about leading lines and the visual journey. So these are incredibly important because leading lines take your viewer on a defined visual journey through your photo, which is amazingly powerful because they give you, it's your chance to tell your viewer exactly what to look at in your photo, which is freaking cool because you can say, hey, I want you to look at this foreground, then I want you to look at this midground, then I want you to look at this background. You are in complete control. And that story that you're telling is strengthened incredibly when there is a visual line connecting them. So visual leading lines have a ton of power to direct the story in your photo. But what the heck is a leading line for those who don't know? If you guys do know, go ahead and put your hand up in the chat or do something if you know what a leading line is already. But it's basically literally any object in the environment that is shaped like a line or a curve that you use to point at something in your frame. For example, this is the Virgin River in Zion National Park, taken from the bridge, a very famous overlook. Actually, I'm wrong. It's not a river, it's a leading line. And you can see how it points perfectly. It's this wonderful curve, and it points perfectly at that rock formation called the Watchman. Now, what do we have here? We have a bunch of waves flowing back into the ocean. No, they're not waves, they're leading lines. You can see how the foam rushing back towards the ocean creates this big movement in from the corners of the frame towards this curling wave, and then that curling wave itself is another line pointing at this rock formation. Here we have some foam on a beach. Wrong. It's not foam. It's a leading line. And what it's doing is it's drawing your attention from the front of the frame, creating this very sinuous. You can see how your eye wanders along that line to the background. And here we have some sticks. No, they're not sticks. They're leading lines, and they point at a river, which is not a river. It's a different leading line, which points at my background element, which is those beautiful rocky domes with the sunset in the background. So you can see there's all kinds of stuff in the natural world that you can use as a leading line to direct your viewer's attention, and it's incredibly, incredibly powerful. What do we have here? A road. Wrong answer. It's leading lines. It's a series of parallel leading lines. And this is cool because you can make these point wherever you want, right? So in this particular case, I shot from this spot and the road is leading straight ahead at those mountains in the background. But say I wanted to tell a different story of the road pointing at the snow-covered hill kind of on the left. Well, I could actually walk along the road to where the road bends to the left and shoot the same photograph from there, and all of a sudden I would have a different photo with a different line pointing to a different mountain telling a different story, right? So what makes a good leading line? Well, the best leading lines should flow into your photo, not across your photo or out of your photo, and the best leading lines are diagonal or curving, not horizontal or vertical. So let's take a look at some examples. Here are leading lines that flow into the photo. You can see these rocky shelves that arc up through the photo and point very, very specifically at my background element, creating that sense of place. And this was not an accident. I chose these leading lines specifically from this point of view because they curve into the photo and because they point at that background element. By contrast, here's a leading line of a little watery rivulet. This is in the Cook Strait in Alaska when in a low tide. But you can see that the line starts on the left-hand side of the frame and it flows through, and it's kind of cool. It looks like a seahorse, and then it flows out the right-hand side of the frame. So this line is actually drawing my attention out of both the left and the right-hand side of the frame. It's not connecting me to the background. So the only connection that's happening here is between the repetition of patterns and not a specific visual journey that I'm trying to lead my viewer on. So this is an example of a not great leading line. Now, like I said, best leading lines go diagonally or curve across the frame. And the reason for that is you want your viewer's eyes to traverse the entire real estate of your photo. And if your viewer's eyes don't traverse that real estate, then it's wasted and it shouldn't be in your frame. And when you put something across the frame like this, you can see that the visual journey starts in the lower left and it flows up towards the upper right. Now, you don't want this leading line to flow off of the frame because that's going to cause your viewer's eyes to leave the photo. So something like this where it starts in the lower left and flows to the upper right is ideal. By contrast, here is a leading line, the stream, that flows directly vertical into the frame. Now, if it wasn't for those beautiful, bright, eye-catching flowers on the left, if that was just a wall of green, the viewer's eye would never even enter that part of the frame. It would stay on that creek and it would flow up directly vertically into the frame, and the entire left-hand side of that photograph is essentially wasted space. So that's why you want to avoid vertical leading lines. All right, now the cool thing about leading lines is you can actually control them through your body and camera position. You can't physically move a river, but you can change your relationship to it, right? You can turn the other direction or you can walk along it till it points where you want. Let me show you how that works. Okay, so here we have a river, the Owens River, and it's, in this particular case, a leading line that starts in the lower left-hand side of my frame and it flows up toward the upper right. Now, what if I want this river to start in the lower right-hand side of my frame and flow to the upper left? Well, all I have to do is turn my body about 90 degrees to the left, and I get this. So now the river's starting in the lower right, flowing towards the upper left, and it's also pointing at two different sets of mountains, which is cool. But now you might be saying, but Josh, I want a leading line to start in the lower left-hand side of my frame, flow to the upper right, and also point at those big mountains in the background. How can I do that? I can't physically move the river. How am I supposed to do that? Well, all you'd have to do in this particular case is actually jump across to the other side of the river to where it bends back around to the right. If you photograph from where that little promontory sticks out into the water, then all of a sudden you're going to have a line in the lower left flowing to the upper right that's going to be pointing at those mountains. So the extent to which you can control a leading line is actually really incredible. It just needs an adjustment of your body position, your camera position, and a little bit of creative thinking. For example, these cracks in this ice point directly at this mountain called Feather Peak. That's not by accident. I found these cracks in the ice farther back, and they were pointing completely to a different direction. They were pointing to the south. And I just followed them along as they meandered through the ice until I found a spot where those cracks pointed to the west towards this mountain. And again, remember how I said that a wide angle lens really exaggerates things close to the camera. It really exaggerates a foreground element. So I can emphasize that particular directionality of these cracks by using it as my foreground element, because you can see farther into the frame the crack spins back around to the left. But I don't want you to notice that as the viewer. I only want you to see the way that the cracks point at that mountain. So by using them as my foreground element with my wide angle lens, I've exaggerated them and I've really emphasized the directionality of those cracks pointed to that mountain. Okay, now do you always need a leading line? We talked about that. Not necessarily. A lot of grand landscape photos survive without leading lines because they have a good connection already between the foreground and the background. In this particular case, the connection is made by the repeating colors between the foreground rock and the sky, as well as the complementary colors between some of the flowers and the background. So you don't always have to have a leading line, but it's very useful to strengthen the visual journey and tell that visual story in your photograph. Okay, moving on. We're doing okay on time. I think we're going to run over a little bit longer, but that's okay. I'm okay with it if you guys are. All right, so continuing our talks about composition is horizon placement. And in general, with a grand landscape photograph, you want to do this. You want to put your horizon about a third of the way from the top of the frame. And this is important because it shows your viewer exactly what is important or unique in your scene. Right? And so here's what I mean by that. You basically divide your photo up into thirds, like a tic-tac-toe board, and you put the horizon roughly on the third line down from the top, like this. Now, is this a hard and fast rule? No, it's not. You might be asking yourself, okay, are you putting it there just because? Is this a rule of thirds thing? And the answer is, well, not exactly. It's a what's important thing. This is your opportunity to tell your viewer exactly what you think is interesting or important or unique about a landscape. And it also allows you to give your landscapes some depth, or your photos some depth. So here's what I mean by all of that. Landscapes themselves are inherently unique. So you want to demonstrate to your viewer, why are you taking this photo? It's because of this cool place. Now, you might have a beautiful sky to frame your landscape, but a sky honestly could be anywhere. They don't provide a sense of place, whereas the landscape inherently provides a sense of place. For example, this is a photo that I took in the Dolomites in Italy. What's unique about this landscape? Boy, it's that carpet of flowers and those cool towers in the background. Yes, that sky is beautiful, but literally that sky could be anywhere, right? That you could photograph a sky like that in Antarctica, probably. What's unique about this place is the flowers and the towers. I didn't realize that rhymed when I started to say that sentence. But that's what I want you to see as a viewer. So that's why I've given 2/3 of the weight of the photograph to that thing. And in terms of depth, you can imagine that if I panned up, if I had an amazing sky and I panned up, that I would lose that immediate sense of connection to my foreground. So keeping the horizon at about a third allows you to demonstrate what's important and gives your landscape photo depth. Now, of course, you can salt this to taste because if you have, for example, a really fascinating landscape and you're shooting it under a truly boring sky, then you probably want to give your landscape a little bit more weight. Whereas if you have a really, really incredible sky and kind of a mediocre landscape, well, then maybe you want to give the sky a little bit more presence. It's all about telling your story of what's interesting. So for example, here's a shot that I took in Death Valley under some of the most interesting clouds I've ever seen in that park. I really wanted to give the clouds a lot of emphasis. And you know, the landscape's quite interesting. The sky for me was also just as interesting. And so I split my composition 50-50 right down the middle. Here's an example of a reflection where the sky and the foreground have about the same dominance, the same visual importance. So they get the same weight in the frame. All right, let's move on here. We got to keep rushing through. We're going to talk next about critical camera settings. These are generally the same across most grand landscapes. And if you know what they are, you'll be in a great spot. So ISO, let's start with that. Put it on your lowest base setting, either 100 or 64, and then forget about it, at least for now. Then in terms of your aperture, you basically want to focus on getting a deep depth of field. And with your shutter, you want to have any applicable motion. You tune your shutter to provide that sense of motion in your photograph. So why is this important? Well, when you want your viewer to focus on something in your frame, guess what? It needs to be in focus. So sharp detail attracts attention. Soft, blurry details push attention away. And motion control is important for artistic expression, as well as providing some sense of emotion in your photographs. So in general, a long shutter speed provides a soft and tranquil feel, and a short shutter speed provides a dramatic and dynamic feel. So let's take a look at f-stop first. You can see how in this photo, with the foreground being out of focus, your eye kind of slides off of it like it's like a greased pan of butter. You just slide right through it to that background. Whereas if I take the same photo and I've got a very sharp foreground, now you look at all the individual parts of the photograph, and it allows me more easily to tell that story of the grand landscape from front to back. So how do we do this? How do we get a photo in sharp focus from front to back? Well, there's actually a really easy system that we can use. And it goes like this. First, start with F8 and focus about 1/3 of the way up from the bottom of the frame. And what I mean by that is divide your frame into tic-tac-toe boards, and then focus on that bottom third line. So in this particular case, you'd focus sort of on those ice cups there about 1/3 of the way up from the bottom of the frame. Then you want to go to manual focus on your lens. And the next step is to enter live view. Once you're in live view, you digitally zoom into the foreground and check sharpness. And if you're a Canon user, you need to hit the depth of field preview button, which is either on your lens or on the body near the lens mount. So you zoom into the foreground to check sharpness. If the foreground is sharp, you zoom into the background digitally again and check the sharpness there. And if your background is sharp, great. You have full depth of field already from front to back. That's fantastic. But if your foreground is soft, then you want to manually pull the focus closer until it's sharp. If your background is still sharp, great. Then your photo is in focus. But if the background is now soft, it means that what you're doing is you have this field of focus that you're sliding back and forth through the frame. It's very likely that you don't have enough depth of field. So now you want to push your focus farther away until the background is sharp, and then recheck the foreground. If that foreground is sharp, then you're done. But if it's soft, that tells you that you need more depth of field. You're basically sliding this focus plane between your foreground and your background elements, and you can't get both of them sharp at the same time. That means you need more depth of field. So if you were at F8, stop down to F11. If you were at F11, stop down to F16, and so on and so forth. So let me really quickly switch back to the where is my thing? There it is. So look, it's so excited, my collar popped up. So here's exactly what I mean by this. So let me pan down here, and I'm going to bring up two things, a microphone and a water bottle. Okay, so say this is my foreground element, and this is my background element. Well, I'm breaking stuff. And this is my field of focus. So when you zoom into live view, you check your foreground, see if it's sharp. If it is, then you check your background. But you can see my field of focus is not big enough to incorporate that. So my background is going to be sharp. So if I push my focus this way to see if my background is sharp, then my foreground might have dropped out of focus. What I need to do is increase that until my field of focus is big enough to incorporate both of those elements. All right, let me jump back now to the presentation. All right, really flying now. We're getting through this, but I will have time for Q&A at the end. So if this makes sense to you, just hold your questions. We'll get to them at the end. Okay, cool. So now we're talking about shutter speed. We've already chosen our aperture, right? Our base ISO and our base ISO, excuse me, and our aperture to get our depth of field. So does that mean our shutter speed is totally limited by what gives us a good exposure? Well, not at all, because we can actually use our aperture, filters, and ISO to target a shutter speed that we want. And here's what I mean by that. Take a look first at the photo on the left. I put my ISO down to its base rate, ISO 64, and then I did that process and I found out that I needed to be at f11 to get my entire scene in focus. And that determined that I needed a shutter speed of 1/6 of a second to get a good exposure. But I wanted more motion in that water. So what can I do? I can actually stop down my aperture to something like f16, and that allows me to double my shutter speed to 1/3 of a second. Now I could take this one step further. I could stop my aperture down to f22 and double my shutter speed again to get even more motion. But what happens if I want to go past that? It turns out that with most wide-angle lenses, you can't go past f22. So how can I get a longer and longer shutter speed? Well, that's where filters come in. You can throw a 6-stop or a 10-stop filter and really stretch out your shutter speed. But say I want to go the other direction. Say I'm at f11 and 1/6 of a second, but I want to actually increase the amount of detail I've got in that water by using a shorter shutter speed. Well, I can't open up my aperture to let in more light because why? I'm going to lose depth of field. But what I can do in this particular case now is increase my ISO. That's going to allow me to get that good exposure while maintaining the right depth of field that I want and targeting that perfect shutter speed. Okay, moving on. Number 7. We got 3 more important tenets left, and these are the quick ones. So we're going to blaze right through them. All right, so you want to shoot during magic hour. 90+% of all grand landscapes are shot around sunrise or sunset. Now, why is that? It's because of the quality of light. There are fewer harsh highlights, fewer deep shadows, the details are easier to see, and it's more flattering light. It's also more interesting light. And why is that? It goes back to what we were talking about showing people things that they haven't seen before. Most people are not out at sunrise or sunset, right? It's only us crazy landscape photographers and maybe some fishermen who are out at those times. Everybody else is out in the middle of the day. So they see blue skies, they see bright light. They don't often see these beautiful colors, these interesting angles of light. That's why sunrise, sunset is so interesting. Let me, as an example, show you 2 photos, almost the exact same scene, taken one here in the middle of the day. You can see how harsh the highlights are, these ugly specular reflections in the stream, all of this gross detail, like just chaotic detail in the bushes and the grass. The mountains are totally backlit. You can't see much detail in them. But the same scene shot at magic hour, right around sunset, you can see all of a sudden the softness in the foreground improves dramatically. There's wonderful softness now in the stream. The mountains have a lot more detail in them because they're being side lit instead of backlit. So you can see how powerful of an effect it is to shoot at magic hour instead of during the middle of the day. Now, there are exceptions to this, of course. Basically, anytime you have soft light on the landscape is a good time to shoot a grand landscape. So we're talking about when it's stormy, during blue hour, or when you have patchy clouds. For example, like this is taken about an hour and a half before sunset, but those beautiful clouds in the sky allowed a bunch of smooth, even light over the landscape with a lot of interesting stuff in the sky. This photo, again, I think this was taken around 2 in the afternoon, but the density of the clouds allowed me to have this beautiful, even light across the landscape to bring out all of the inherent details. This was shot at blue hour, maybe 30 minutes after the sun went down, and that even light allows a lot of the beautiful details of the scene to come out without those harsh highlights. And this was taken at lunchtime, but because there are so many clouds, they allowed this even umbrella of light to move across the landscape, bringing out the inherent detail of the rocks, but also minimizing all the specular bright reflections on the water. All right, the next step in our grand landscape toolbox is to get a painterly feel for the photograph. And the reason we do this, or how we do this, is by darkening the sky and brightening the landscape. And the reason we want to do this is it equalizes the exposure across the frame and provides the same quality of light as a classical landscape painting. So think of any classic painting you've seen by somebody like Albert Bierstadt. You know, he doesn't paint the sky super bright and the landscape super dark. Everything is nice and evenly exposed. So when you do this in your photographs, it gets rid of that snapshot feel and makes it feel more like a work of art. And the way you do this, you can do this in the field with a graduated ND filter or in post-processing through a graduated adjustment filter or a graduated brush. And 3 stops, generally speaking, is the sweet spot that you want to darken the sky and brighten the landscape by. So here's an example. Here's this photo of a lake in New Zealand called Lake Te Anau. And this photo has a very snapshotty feel to it because the sky is bright and the foreground is dark. But if I darken the sky and I brighten the ground, all of a sudden the evenness, the smoothness of the exposure across the frame increases dramatically. Here's a photo that I shot also in New Zealand, and again it feels so much like a snapshot. The clouds in the sky are blown out, the rocks in the foreground are too dark, but if I equalize that exposure, all of a sudden it feels much more like a classical landscape painting, making it into much more of an artistic, or it makes a photo feel more like a piece of art. Here again, darken the sky, brighten the foreground, creates such a massive difference in the feel of your photographs. So that is one of the key secret points to getting a great grand landscape feel. Here again, I have a photo of a river with some clouds, but by this feels like a snapshot, right? This looks like a phone photo. All I have to do is darken the sky, brighten the foreground, and all of a sudden that photo feels tremendously different and feels so much more like a classical landscape painting. It really adds to the beautiful artistic feel of the image. All right, and our final thing that we need to do to create a grand landscape photo is simply to add pop with contrast and saturation. And this is important because they're 2 simple adjustments that add a ton of color, drama, and punch to your shots. So these are really the icing on the cake for that wow effect. If you feel like your photos are flat or boring, just a little contrast, a little saturation is going to do wonders. And I highly recommend that you do this in post-processing, not in the camera itself. And the reason for that, when you're out there shooting in the field, I actually recommend that you use the flat or neutral camera profile because that gives you the most accurate representation of your raw data. If you're shooting in something like Vivid or landscape, yeah, the photos might look really punchy on the back of your camera, but they're not necessarily helping you make good decisions about your exposure, about the colors, about the brightness and shadows of your photograph. So I recommend using those flatter picture controls and then adding contrast and saturation in post. And I do this very simply. I simply like to add a curves adjustment layer, a curves adjustment in Lightroom where I drag the highlights up and I drag the shadows down. Very simple, and I'll show you the effect. So here's a photo with this is basically the out of camera raw file. You can see it looks quite flat, quite dingy. All I have to do is add some contrast, some saturation, and the thing comes to life. It's like a gray film was lifted off of the landscape. Here again, basic out of camera raw file. Now add contrast and saturation, and boom, we've got pop. This is such an easy way to add color, drama, and impact to your photos. So now that we've gone through all of the those 9 essential parts of epic grand landscape photos, let's watch that process in action. Okay, so I'm going to show you a sequence of photos that I took, the process of creating a grand landscape photo. So what was the first element in our toolkit? Get to an amazing location, right? So for me, the Little Lakes Valley here in the Eastern Sierra Nevada fits that bill perfectly. And I also want to put on my wide angle lens, right? So I've got a 14mm lens on. Now the next thing I need to do is start to identify the story that I want to tell. And in this particular case, the foreground that I love is this stream, the way that it flows through this meadow. I love the lake and the trees in the midground, and of course my background element are those big mountains. So that allows me to start to set up my basic composition, right? I've got this very simple story that I'm telling: stream, lake, mountains. There it is. And there's not a lot of extraneous stuff in the frame. Now in this particular case, the river or the stream is a little bit too close to the bottom of my frame, so I'm going to scrunch down a little bit, but you can see I screwed up where I placed my horizon. It's now too high in the frame, so I'm going to pan up to get it more about the third line. Now, unfortunately, now what I've done by this particular position is I've killed my leading line. You can see that it disappears into the bush on the left-hand side. So I'm going to move over to the left to open up that leading line again and get it going down towards that midground. So now I've got my basic composition set up, looking kind of like this. It's time to figure out what my settings need to be. So I want to be at my lowest base ISO. It turns out I needed to be at f16 to get everything in focus for this frame, and that put my shutter speed at 1/250th of a second for good exposure. But I don't want that, right? I actually want smooth flowing water through my foreground, through my stream. And the other thing, I'm forgetting the fact that I need to photograph at magic hour, right? So even though I have this composition set up, what I want to do is actually want to come back later and shoot the same picture at magic hour. And you can see with those same settings, f16, ISO 64, now I need a shutter speed of 0.4 seconds. That's giving me a lot of smoothness and flow through my foreground element. It's already giving me that beautiful light in the sky. What's next is to darken the sky, brighten the foreground to give it that quality of light of a classic landscape painting. You can see the difference that that makes. And then the only thing that remaining is to add contrast and saturation, and boom, all of a sudden we've got a great grand landscape photo in 9 easy steps. So if you understand this toolkit, it really can be that simple to create these amazing, wow, jaw-dropping landscapes. So holy cow, we did it. Oh my gosh, we made it all the way through. You guys are freaking troopers. That was a ton of information. We blasted through it. I mean, kudos to you. You took the opportunity today to learn something new, and I would love to hear how that feels, because we learned a ton of stuff today. Absolute, like I brought out the fire hose and I just sprayed you guys in the face with landscape information. And my hope is that even a total beginner can walk away from today's training with a framework, a fantastic framework for creating wow photos. But I want to hear from you guys, so let me know in the chat, where are you at now? Do you feel like you can take the information that we went over in this workshop and use it right now today to create better photographs? Did you learn at least a few new tips and ideas to improve your shots? Did you enjoy yourself and this webinar? I would love, love, love to hear what you learned. If there was something specific, is there a technique that you're excited to try out? Is there some sort of epiphany moment that you had? Please let me know in the webinar. So we've got questions. Yeah, can repeat the foreground through background focusing. Definitely. I know that I blazed through that. We can go through that. The Painterly info. This is awesome. This is great, you guys. I love to see that you have enjoyed it, that you're sticking around through the end. We've actually got Q&A coming up in about 15 to 20 minutes. But first, I'm really stoked that you guys did enjoy this training, because I want to tell you a little bit more about the course that I just launched today. It's called 10 Techniques to Transform Your Landscapes. And it's my brand new signature video course. I spent 2 years making this thing. I poured my heart and soul into creating this course. And the reason that I want to tell you guys about it, if you had fun at the workshop today, is because the course picks up where this workshop ends. So this webinar, the last 60 minutes, we basically just covered one small area of landscape photography. But the course itself covers not just grand landscapes, but all kinds of landscapes. It covers abstracts, it covers intimates, telephotos, long exposures, more. And in fact, the course comes with a guarantee, which is to give you a set of tools that lets you create photos you love in any scene. So say you're in the forest in flat light. If you enroll in this course, you're going to get the tools to create photos that you love. If you're in the desert in winter, you're going to be able to create a photo that you love. Or if you're in the Arctic in the summertime, my goal with this course is to give you a toolkit to create some photos that you love. So there are even more practical approaches to photography. There are more step-by-step solutions. There's 10 times more composition than we can talk about today. There are creativity exercises and extra resources like there are cheat sheets, handouts, question and answer. There's an exclusive community. There's actually even a chance for mentoring, either group mentoring or one-on-one mentoring. And I could talk about this at length, but I'd rather show it to you if that sounds good. So let's get out of here. And if you navigate to, actually don't navigate, just keep watching the webinar. I'll do this just keep watching. So it's at learn.joshuacripps.com. Here's the course, and it lays out basically a lot of the stuff that I just said. I'm going to skip through some of this because I just said it. You don't need to know who I am. We already talked about that. Here's really what I want to get into, the course features. What's inside of this course? It's basically a guided learning course. There are 11 individual lessons. Each has 3 to 4 chapters on specific digestible topics. So there are actually 35 learning videos that go over all kinds of aspects of landscape photography. There are also photo challenges to help reinforce the ideas contained in each lesson, and bonuses to help your learning like cheat sheets, sample images, and guides. Now there's also a community, and we have an exclusive community of like-minded photographers to share ideas with, to get feedback from, and there's office hours with me so you can get feedback. We can do portfolio reviews, we can do coaching, mentoring, business development, personal projects, all that kind of stuff. So I want to tell you a little bit about who this course is for. It's basically for beginning to intermediate and slightly above photographers who want to advance their skills. And if any of these things apply to you, then this is a great course for you. So if you can't get your photos perfectly sharp from front to back, if you have a hard time with exposure and your shots come out too dark or blown out, blown highlights, if you're struggling with creativity, you feel like your shots look like everyone else's, if you want to learn about grand landscapes, what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take this webinar recording and put it into the course as a bonus lesson on top of what's already there. If you want to learn how to use a 10-stop ND filter for long exposure photography, if you can't figure out why your photo is not a wow shot or what it's missing, I specifically talk through the 4 critical elements of every fantastic photo and how you can analyze your own photos to figure out what they're missing. If you're frustrated because your photos always look like snapshots, if you don't know what the best settings are in any given situation, I actually have a system that I teach where you learn the exact right settings to use in every situation based on your artistic priorities. So if you're struggling to figure out what settings should I be using, that's a lesson for you. If you want to figure out how to find better foreground subjects or better compositions overall, if you don't know how to highlight the important features of a landscape, if you don't know how to place multiple strong subjects, or you don't know where to get started for intimate or abstract landscape compositions, if you can't figure out what makes a good photo, even though you're in a location or you just can't get your photos to look how you want them to look, then I think this is the course for you. And I could tell you a lot more about it, but I'd rather just show you, and then I'm going to get back to what some other people have already said. So if you log into the course, basically, here's what it looks like. You get this all of your lessons are laid out right here, and each one of these is a video lesson. And the way that these works, for example, if you click on a lesson, it brings up the lesson, and every single lesson has a learning objective here at the top that tells you exactly what you're going to learn in this lesson and the key points of the lesson. Then begins the video lesson itself, and I'm going to turn the volume off on this. But you know, I worked with a professional videographer and a professional editor, and I wanted this course to look and sound awesome. And in fact, let me turn it on here so you can see. So every lesson has a ton of visual aids like this, talking through the learning points of the lesson. There are tons and tons. I think overall there's something like 300 sample images demonstrating all of the different, I think overall there are 300 sample images demonstrating the different parts of the lessons. And every lesson also includes a chapter transcript. So if you wanted to figure out what the heck did you just say at minute 50 or 5, then you can figure out exactly what I said. And there's a Q&A section below every single lesson, so you can ask questions and get answers. You can also download all the transcripts. You can download all of the videos. Now, the end of every lesson also includes photo challenges that you can go out and practice with yourself or with a friend to really hammer home all of the information in the lesson. And on top of that, many of the lessons also include bonus cheat sheets and downloads. For example, like this, if you're trying to figure out, hey, I'm out here today in bright direct light and I want to photograph What can I photograph? Well, you know, that doesn't necessarily work great for grand landscapes, but it does work great for subjects with flowing lines like sand dunes or rolling hills. So there's a ton of bonus content in here as well. As I mentioned, there's also a photo community that's exclusive just to people in the course here. It's on Flickr. This is a great place to get critical feedback. So the way that it works is you join the community and you can get feedback. You can post to the photo pool. And I have a guideline here for exactly how to critique and analyze photographs. And this can be a daunting process, I realize that, because you have to critique the next two images in the photo pool, but it's a great exercise to really start thinking about all of the decisions that you make in creating a landscape photograph. So where did I lost my, there we go. So I could keep telling you about the course, and honestly, I think it's a good course. Like I wanted to make this the best possible course. So what I did is I actually took 20 photographers and I ran them through as guinea pigs and asked them for feedback to make it as good of a course as possible. And this is what they came back with. I honestly couldn't believe this. Gail, for example, said, "This course has got to be the best investment I've ever made for my photography." I mean, that's incredible to hear somebody say that, right? She said, "I have experienced so many, oh my God, how did I not get that before? Moments, forehead slapping revelations for me." Janet here has said how blown away by the content she was. So this was very real world helpful topics for me, where Josh analyzes 4 critical parts of his images to show what works. She's already watched that more than once. And Sean here, who is a professional photojournalist in his first career, has said that he's finished the course already. It's fabulous. He's going to watch it again and again so that the lessons really stick in. So that's just a little bit about the course. Here is the pricing plans. And hold on a second, because I have a special bonus offer just for you guys for being on the webinar. So the basic course that includes full unlimited access is $397, comes with 35 instructional videos. It's 3.5 hours of content, includes all the lesson transcripts, all the bonus downloads, all the lesson discussions and Q&A, and the exclusive photo community. So that's what you get when you sign up for the course. The silver tier also includes group mentoring, 6 weeks of that. It's limited to 16 spaces. And then the gold tier includes 8 weeks of personal one-on-one mentoring with you and me, and we can do anything you want with that, whether that's personal projects, professional development, portfolio review, critique, anything like that. So that's what the course looks like. That's what the course sounds like. The question is, you might be asking, why would you enroll in this course instead of learning from your own on YouTube? And my answer is, think about every how-to video you've ever watched on YouTube. Do you notice how the presenters talk for 20 minutes before getting into the actual thing they're trying to teach? Don't you wish they would just shut up and teach you how to do what they do? So that's the philosophy I used when creating the lessons for this course. There's no filler, there's no blather. It's just good information and easy to digest bites, because my goal for the course is to get you real photographic transformations in as little time as possible. So these techniques I'm presenting took me years to learn and thousands of dollars in time, travel, excursions, and practice. So I really want to help you understand this stuff as quickly and simply as possible. You may also be asking, how does this compare to an in-person workshop? Well, I realize that there's a difference between taking a course online and taking a course in person. And so I really want to make sure that this course delivers the same value as a workshop, if not more. I don't want to waste your time. I don't want to waste your money. I genuinely want this course to be awesome for you. So I've worked to make sure every lesson is useful, practical, easy to understand, quick to consume, and information dense. And I would say, based on my experience teaching, most students can absorb 2 to 3 of these techniques over the course of a workshop. So this course has 11 total lessons. You're getting 3 to 4 workshops worth of information that you can consume on your own schedule. And just like a workshop, you can ask questions, get answers, get feedback, build a community of friends and fellow photographers. So the course enrollment is actually, it's open right now. It opened just before the webinar started, and it closes Friday night. And after that, it's closed and you can't enroll anymore. And the reason for that is I want to create a class. And I want everybody to go through the course at the same time. That's going to help foster community, it's going to help foster discussion, and it's going to help the mentoring make sense. So after it closes, it's going to be closed indefinitely. If you're interested in something like this, I'm not sure if I'm going to reopen it. This is my first time doing this, so I have to see how it goes. And the refund policy, I want to let you know I do have a 30-day refund policy. Well, the question becomes, should you invest in this course? Like I said, I think it's a great course, and other photographers who have gone through it think it's a good course, but is it right for you? I really want it to be right for you. So if you fit into any of these categories, I think you should enroll. So if you've already spent thousands of dollars on your camera, lenses, tripod, and accessories, but your camera just sits on the shelf because you're frustrated by how hard it seems to create amazing landscape photos, well, in my opinion, education is the #1 investment that will help you take advantage of all that great gear you have. So if your gear is not being used, that's a huge waste of money and potential. Instead, you should invest in training to help you get the most mileage and the most enjoyment out of your equipment. Now, if you think that this course will help you create at least 2 portfolio quality images in the next year, then I think you should enroll. Years ago, I went to New Zealand on this photo trip for a month, and my goal from that trip was to create 3 portfolio images, and all told over the month with flights and food and rental car and all that stuff, spent about $4,000. Which means if you do the math, I spent $1,333 per portfolio image that I came home with. And I was willing to do it, but looking back, God, I wish I had knew just a little bit more about photography, had a few more skills, a little bit better technique, because I think I would have come home with even more keepers. So the question is, what is a portfolio image worth to you? How much do you typically spend on a photo trip? And is it worth it to you to invest in your education to maximize the productivity of your photo trips? Now, if you're willing to spend 3.5 hours of your time in exchange for weeks of combing through YouTube and months or years of frustrating trial and error, then this course is for you. I mean, YouTube is an amazing resource. I have a YouTube channel there teaching photography. I freaking love it. But if you want to learn from YouTube, first you have to find the videos. Then you have to figure out which videos are good and which videos suck, and which instructors you can trust and who is just spouting BS. Then you have to wade through all the blather and fluff to get what you want to learn. And then you have to figure out how you can practice those skills. So yes, you can do it that way, or you can enroll in this course. I will give you the skills. I will hand them to you. I'll hand you the skills, hand you the techniques, and the practical approaches that I use, that I personally use, that will make the biggest differences in your landscape photography. You get the succinct lesson summaries so you can learn exactly what you want in the shortest amount of time. And if you have 30 days, or if you have time in the next 30 days to look through this, then I think you should enroll, because you have nothing to lose. There's a 30-day money-back guarantee. If you find the course valuable, that's awesome. That's really my goal. I'm not trying to sell you guys a bunch of crap. Like, I genuinely poured my heart into this course, and I want it to be valuable for you. So if you enroll and you find it valuable, awesome. We both win. But if you got into it and it's not what you expected it to be, just send me an email. No problem. You can withdraw from the course. I will send you 100% of your money back. So that being said, that being the course, I have an exclusive offer for you guys. So full access to this course is $397. I'm also going to throw in, if you enroll through the webinar, I'm going to give you free access to my Lightroom Master Raw Processing course that teaches exactly how to process your photos like a pro in Lightroom. That's worth $69. And I'm going to give you my Lightroom case studies where I take 5 images and I walk them through from start to finish exactly how I would process those for certain effects like dark and dramatic or grand landscape or bringing out detail. That's also worth $69. And as I mentioned, there's a Flickr community for the course. That's free. That's totally free to join Flickr, but they do have a pro level account that has a couple of extra bonuses, and I want to give you a Flickr Pro account. So all of that stuff is worth $585, but my exclusive offer for you guys today on the webinar, if you enroll in the course before midnight, Sunday night, California time, which is about 36 hours from now, I'm going to knock $100 off the course so you can get it for $297. I'm going to give you my Lightroom course for free. I'm going to give you my case studies for free, and I'm going to give you that Flickr Pro account for free. So instead of $585, you're getting all of that for $297, saving 288 bucks. But actually, there's a little bit more. So if you get out of the webinar window, don't close the webinar, but just drop it down from full screen. If you scroll down, you should see a timer. You might need to refresh the page, but you should see a timer counting down. Right now it says 33 minutes and 0 seconds. If you enroll in the course before that timer expires, I'm also going to give you a fast action bonus. So I mentioned that there's a mentoring part of the course, right? It's 2 weekly group video chats that are an hour long. They go for 6 weeks. So there's going to be 12 hours of recorded group coaching calls and mentoring. That's worth $400. I'm going to throw that in for free as well. So that's actually $985 worth of stuff that you can get for 297 bucks, saving $688 US at 70% off. And all you have to do is enter that code webinar15 if you order before the timer on the webinar window closes. So let me show you exactly how to do that right now. So if you come to the course here, you can hit this enroll, and please take your time to read through this page. It gives you all of the information about this course. Like I said, I want this to be a course that resonates with you. So please take your time to read through all of this stuff. You scroll down to the bottom, you can choose your enrollment tier. There is a payment plan option for each tier. The bronze tier is the full course, the silver tier includes the group mentoring, and the gold tier includes the one-on-one mentoring. So all you have to do is hit enroll here. That takes you to this page where you can add that coupon. For example, you can type in webinar 15 and apply that coupon, and that'll knock it off. And that tells me exactly who enrolled using that coupon, so I can give you all of your bonuses. Then you provide your email address, your name. You need to click this if you want to receive the emails. I won't send you promotional emails from the course, but all the instructional emails like downloads and mentoring and all that stuff, you need to do that. That's where you put in your credit card information, and you need to agree to the terms and conditions here. So let me, oops, wrong button. So once you put in that, what will happen is you go through to a page where you then put in your password to access the course. Actually, let me redo this so I can walk you through the exact entire process. Okay, so I'm going to use my super secret code. And sorry, this won't work for you guys. Yay, it's free! Cool, love it. So you can put in that code webinar 15, or if you missed the fast action bonus, webinar 36, and then you enroll in the course here. You simply create a password so you can have access to your account here in the learning platform. Create account, and then as soon as you hit that, boom, you have instant access to the course. And something I forgot to mention is the course is totally self-paced, and the lessons are dripped out week by week. So to start, you have access to the first 3 lessons. And the reason I'm doing that is because there's a ton of information in here, and I don't want to overload you. I don't want to be responsible for your brain melting because my insurance doesn't cover that. So it goes week by week. A couple of new lessons will be rolled out to you. This gives you a chance to really digest everything and practice the challenges. So for example, you can start right now with Lesson 3, Chapter 2, Getting the Perfect Exposure Every Time. Includes this bonus about a process to follow to get that perfect exposure. And here is, what the course looks like. Okay, so that's how that all works. that is my offer to you guys. $297 for all this stuff if you enroll in the next 30-ish minutes. Or take your time, think about it. This offer is still good for the next 36 hours, so you can still get into the course for a discount and get all that other stuff for free. And that, you guys, is going to wrap up my spiel and the webinar. It's time for Q&A. So I am going to switch back over to my face here so you can see me. And if you have a question, I only ask that you limit it either to what we talked about in the webinar today or questions about the course, and I will be more than happy to answer that. That way we don't go down a rabbit hole of something we didn't talk about today that takes 2 hours to explain. Alrighty, okay, so we have a bunch of questions already coming in. I'm going to try to get to these as many as I can. Let's scroll up here a little bit. So we're going to take about 30 minutes, guys, to go through these questions. If I miss your question, if it gets scrolled up off the top of the chat box, just ask it again, and I'll get to as many as I possibly can. Okay, so let's see here. Well, thanks. So I've already got Sean here saying the course is amazing. I highly recommend it. Thank you very much. So Lynn asks, do you teach Lightroom? Yes, I do. I have a course on Lightroom that I'm actually giving away as part of the 10 Techniques course. So if you enroll in the 10 Techniques course, which builds off of what we talked about today, then you get that Lightroom course absolutely free. So somebody asked, a non-4109, are you getting the foreground and background sharp without focus stacking? Yes, I am. So generally speaking, my approach to composition is I like to have a midground, because for me a midground provides depth and it provides a sense of environment. So if you're getting so close to your foreground element that you need to focus stack, then you most often don't have a midground. So I like to be about 2 to 3 feet away from my foreground element. That gives me a midground, and it also allows me to get everything super deep, super sharp focus from front to back without using focus stacking. I find that for my style of composition, which is almost every single photo that doesn't make any sense. Of course, every photo I showed you is my style of composition, but the general composition that I've laid out in a lot of the images today, I'm about 2 to 3 feet from the foreground, shooting at around f16, and that gives me everything sharp from front to back. All right, let's see here. Night photography, please, asked Donna. Down the road, for sure. I've got a course I'll be doing on that. Will you have a webinar focused on just long exposure? That's a great question. I have an ebook about it, and in the 10 Techniques course that I just showed you guys, there's actually an entire chapter an entire lesson about long exposure photography. So we talk about the one thing that you need for every single long exposure and how to get it. I talk about 10-stop and 6-stop filters and how to use them, best practices, how to calculate your new long exposure times. We even talk about long exposures off the camera, which is a really fun, abstract, and unique approach to creating really creative, really personal images. Can you express, let's see here. If I could only take one lens with me on let's move this over so I'm not looking quite so off camera. All right, if you could only take one lens on a landscape journey, which would be the best one to bring? Now, that's a really personal question, to be honest with you. My favorite lens for landscape is actually a 70-200 telephoto. So even though we spent the whole day today talking about grand landscapes, I love shooting with a telephoto lens. And the reason for that is it allows you to pick out very small vignettes from the landscape, creating very unique personal imagery. So, but if I only had to pick one lens, oh boy, I would say for most people, a wide angle lens. A 16-35 is probably the ideal candidate. If you're traveling, maybe like an 18-35 because they tend to be smaller and lighter. A 14-24 is an amazing lens if you're shooting Nikon, but it's huge and it's heavy. So something like a 16-35 or the 24-70, those have a lot more versatility. Okay, so will you offer on-location workshops in California? So that's a great question. I'm moving a little bit away from workshops, trying the online educational thing. I do love teaching workshops, but there is a limit to the number of places I can go because I physically have to go there. So be on the lookout because there's always a chance. I'm actually thinking about doing a new workshop in the High Sierra that's going to be horseback based, potentially this summer or next summer. So if you're on the mailing list, which you are, if you sign up for the workshop, you'll definitely get notifications about all of those. All right, so the course is, yes, the course is self-paced. Um, so you can watch all the lessons that you want or need. You don't have to watch all of them. Just pick out the ones that you want. And it's self-paced. It flows out week by week. So when you first sign up, you get access to the first 3 lessons, and then you get 2 to 3 lessons per week. After that, it should take 4 to 5 weeks for all of the lessons to flow out so that you can really digest and go through each one uh, in a reasonable amount of time. I want to also mention you have lifetime access to the course. You don't have to finish it in 5 weeks. It starts when you start, and you have infinite time to finish it. So you can watch 1 or 2 lessons this week. You can watch lessons 3 and 4 next month. You can watch it over the course of the year. You can also download all the lessons so you have access to them offline. This course really, my hope is that I structured it because I want you to finish the course, right? Online education is such a problem, or can be such a problem, because people go, hey, here's my course. It's 146 hours worth of content. And people go, how can I ever watch 146 hours worth of content? That's insane. I'm never going to do it. So they don't even start. And so I structured this course in a way because I really wanted you to be able to start and continue and complete. So that's why you have access to only 3 lessons to begin. Every single chapter is only 5 to 10 minutes. So it's very easy to get a very information dense nugget in a short amount of time. So I want to keep the motivation up. That's why the Flickr community is there. You can create friends and discussions and motivate each other. That's also the reason that the enrollment window closes after a week, because I want everybody to go through this together. Okay, so coupon says invalid. All right, let me know. Send me an email if you're having trouble with a coupon. I'll try to get it figured out. Is there a monthly payment plan for the course? Yes, yes there is. So every tier has a monthly payment plan. You can pay it in one fell swoop, or you can pay it in 3 monthly installments, and that's all laid out in the enrollment area. In fact, let me go back and I'll show you guys that. Uh, bu- 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 No, come on. Matt. Sorry, I'm having technical difficulties. Let's do this again. Bah. Wait, I thought this was an incognito window. All right, bear with me, guys. Here we go. Okay, so if you hit the enroll section, you can see all of the payment plans are available right here. You can pay in one or 3 months. All right, and the coupon code should work for every level. Oh, right. Actually, the coupon code that I gave you, webinar, is good for the bronze tier. If you want to enroll in the silver tier, all you have to do is replace the word webinar with silver. So something like that. And there you go. So that's working. Okay, cool. So the next question is, which code is the best option, 36 or 15? Okay, that's a great question. So they are the same discount. But what they do, they're basically, the webinar 15 code expires after this webinar ends. So it expires at 1 p.m. California time. And that's the one that includes the fast action bonus with the 12 hours of recorded group coaching calls. So if you want to sign up for the course, that's the best coupon code because that gives you the most bonus stuff. But if you need some extra time to think about it, if you're not ready to sign up, you want to review the page, I totally get it. Like I said, I want this to be an awesome course for you guys. So the webinar 15 code is going to expire at 1 p.m. California time in about 20 minutes. Then after that, you can still use the webinar 36 code. That gives you 36 hours to enroll in the course and still get all of the other bonuses. Oh, and I totally forgot to mention the 30-day money-back guarantee. If you guys don't like the course and you want to unenroll, you can keep the bonuses. Like, I'm really, really, really want you to love this course. And I'm confident in the quality and the content. So if you even want to try it, there's no risk, right? You can enroll. I'll send you all the free bonuses. And then if you don't like it, the course isn't for you, just let me know. You can keep the Lightroom courses. That's cool. That's my gift to you guys. All right, so let's go through again. Some of the other questions here are, let me get back to my face. I like talking to you guys directly. There we go. All right, so beady-doo, scott-a-doodle-I-do, gotta find where I was in the questions. Whoa, you guys asking a ton of questions. That's awesome. Okay, so people are saying they're having a problem with the webinar 15 code. Let me see what could be going on. Because that's a time sensitive thing, so I want to make sure that's not working. Webinar 15, is it working? Okay, it's working. Oh, you know what the issue might be is if you're enrolling on the silver or the gold tier, that webinar 15 code doesn't work. You have to use a different code, which is silver or gold 15. This platform, their coupon system is frustrating to say the least to create, so that's a little confusing, I get it, but just replace the word webinar with silver or gold and it should work for you. So yeah, people are asking for the coupon code again. Hopefully at this point that is clear what the coupon code is, but just in case I'll roll back up to the webinar page there. Okay, so I'm going to go through some of the other course questions first, and then I'll get into the photography questions. Okay, a lot of great photography questions. A lot of great photography questions. Can't wait to get into these. Okay, so can you please provide the link to the course? Yes, if you are on the webinar page, just scroll down to the bottom. You'll see a button that says, oops, let's go to the webinar page. All right, so if you scroll down to the bottom of this page, you will see right here it says get the course. Right, so all you got to do is click that button and it'll take you to the course page. And then you can read through, you can enroll, you can do all that kind of stuff there. Cool? Great, 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 great. Let's go back to my face and answer more questions. Okay, so is the course available for review forever? Yes, it is. So once you enroll, you have lifetime access to the course. That's not going to expire. Okay, so Yvonne says she can't find the course. Hopefully you saw that link just that I just talked about. But don't worry, I'm going to be sending out an email after this with links to everything. So exposure blending, find the main course page, monthly payment. I can only find the main page. Okay, so if you want the course, go to the sign up, go to the enroll. You want to hit that enroll button, and it'll take you down to the bottom, and you can select. If you don't want to pay in monthly payments, then you can just select that bronze tier, the full course, or the silver tier, or the gold tier. So those are the straight up options. Those are not the monthly payment plan options. Okay. Why enrolling courses grayed out? So if you're enrolling courses grayed out, send me an email. Then I will sort it out for you. Yes. Yeah. Oh, I totally forgot. You guys rock. Um, if you sign up for the course, let me know. Put it in the chat window. I want to shout you out. For example, Joe got it. Love it. Love it. Thanks for signing up, Joe. Okay, so trying to do bronze with payments. Webinar 15 still says invalid. Okay, let me check what's going on there. I'll get you guys sorted out here. And I know we're running long. That's cool. I'm going to stick around and answer your photography questions as long as we need to stick around and do that, okay? Because I really want this to be a good experience for you guys, that you get your questions answered, that we don't just spend the whole time talking about the freaking course. I mean, I love the course. I want you guys to love the course. Oh, yes. Okay, great. So here's the thing with the payment plan options, and I apologize for not explaining this earlier. I had to make separate coupon codes for every single tier of the course, and it was a little frustrating, and I didn't want to put them all in the webinar because I knew it would be a little confusing. But basically, what you want to do if you want to enroll in the payment plan option is you can use this code, Bronze 15 Payment Plan, PP. Okay, so use that code. You can also, those codes also apply. Let me show you, in fact, if this makes sense. So if you want to enroll in the bronze payment plan, use that PP. I'm going to put all of these codes in the email as well. So yeah, unfortunately this platform, it's great in a lot of ways. The way that they do their coupons is a little cumbersome, a little annoying. So there's bronze. If you want to enroll by the end of the webinar, you use the 15 payment plan one. Then if you want to enroll by tomorrow night, you can use bronze 36 payment plan. And that goes for silver as well. You can do that. So these are all your different options. Basically, you put PP on the end if you want the payment plan. You use the silver, use the name of the tier, and then if you enroll by the end of the webinar, you use 15. If you enroll by tomorrow night, use 36. And I apologize. I know that's confusing. If you wanted to enroll by like the end of the webinar, but you couldn't get it figured out, just send me an email, you guys. We can work it all out. So it's not a drama, right? Like don't panic. If you want access to the course and the bonuses, we're going to get you access to the course and the bonuses, okay? Cool. Killer. Yes, thank you for enrolling. It is Milford Sound. That's the background. That's awesome. You guys rock. Oh man, Chris is in, Joseph's in. This is awesome. Okay, so I think we've got most of our course questions answered. If there are any more that pop up, please let me know. Otherwise, I'm going to switch back to my face, my ugly mug, and I'm going to talk through some more photography questions here. Okay, let's go up, 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 up. Oh my gosh, you guys rock. So many great questions. Let's take a look up here. Okay. Okay, beautiful, beautiful. Oh, this is great. I'm really happy to hear that people who knew a lot of this stuff already were learning things, appreciating the description of the color contrast, the tonal contrast, and that's going to help their photography. That's fantastic. Donna, thank you so much. I'm glad that you enjoyed the webinar. Okay, so let's keep going down here. I'm going to find some questions here. Can you talk about filters? Boy, that is a can of worms right there. I would say, yeah, let's talk about filters really quickly. My favorite filters are solid ND filters, 10-stop, 6-stop filters. I love those for doing long exposures. Past that, my next favorite filters are circular polarizers. Then past that, I would use graduated ND filters. I personally don't use a ton of those anymore because the dynamic range of cameras is getting so good, but I still like to use those when I'm shooting anything moving, because if you're taking, for example, if you're doing exposure blending and you want to do a sky exposure and a foreground exposure, and you have something moving between those two frames, then sometimes that can get a little funky. And I also like using ND filters or grad ND filters when I'm shooting at the coast. And the reason for that is I want to balance my sky exposure with my foreground exposure, but I'm also targeting specific shutter speeds between half a second to 2 seconds. That gives that beautiful painterly, not painterly, but that silky look when the water flows back into the ocean. So those are the filters that I recommend using. As far as how to best use those filters, that is, I mean, I could give an entire 4-hour webinar on how to use filters. The 10 Techniques course does go through all of those things. It goes through 10-stop and 6-stop NDs, goes through circular polarizers, and it goes through graduated ND filters. So if you really, really, really want to learn about filters and how to use those well, then I would recommend enrolling in the course and checking it out there. Okay, let's keep going down, finding more questions. Oh, hey, Gail, how are you? Gail from my New Zealand trip. Just so nice to see you on here. She was one of the testers of the course, and I was so pleased to hear that she enjoyed it. So, okay. Course. Okay, here we go. A few questions from Anonymous 8150. Do you ever use focal blending to enlarge background features? I personally don't. I don't have anything against it. I just like to spend more time outside and less time in front of my computer. And so I kind of like to, and I also like the satisfaction of making those choices in the field. Like if I want my background bigger, I know that I can step back and zoom in. And I like to play with that compromise between my foreground dominant and my background dominance of those elements. So again, for those reasons, I like to have a shot, bring it into Lightroom, do a couple of adjustments, and have it done. So I don't do a ton of blending for that reason. So when talking about the painterly effect, do you use split ND filters or post-processing? Aha, okay, so yes, I got into this just a little bit. Mostly I'm using post-processing now, and the reason for that is the dynamic range of modern cameras is so good that you can get a good histogram even in pretty extreme scenes, like at sunset when the sky is 3 to 4 stops brighter than the foreground. You can still get a good exposure. So what I do in the field is I target good exposure, I target a good histogram, and I'm less worried about the visual aesthetics of the way that photo looks in my camera. Then what I do is I come into Lightroom, and usually I will brighten the exposure and then drop the highlights, raise the shadows, and put a graduated filter across from the sky to the foreground to really even out that exposure. And how do you always seem to have great skies? Okay, so I am the sky controller. All I have to do is snap my fingers and the skies appear. No, here's what is happening is one, I'm only showing you my best work from years of photographing, right? I'm not showing you my boring skies, my blue skies, my empty skies, all the times that I got skunked. So I'm showing you my best possible photographs with my most interesting skies. Also, I go out as much as possible. The more you go out, the more good light you're going to find. The other thing, which I get into more in the course, is how can you create good light? Well, there's not a lot you can do, but what you can do is try to get rid of your expectations, right? So if you go out thinking, I have to shoot a big grand landscape and conditions don't align with that, you go home with no photos. You go home disappointed. But if you go out and you think, hey, I'm open to anything that happens, and a little patch of sky appears over here and sends a beam of light down, and that's a photo that you can create with your telephoto lens instead of your wide angle, well, all of a sudden you've picked out just the most epic part of that scene, the most beautiful light in that moment, not necessarily the grand picture that you had in mind, but the best part of what was actually there. So you can really maximize your keeper rate, your luck, by getting rid of your expectations and focusing on the story that the landscape is telling you. So thanks for that. It's a good question. I'm not sure who said this. It was one of the attendees at the Out of Moab conference that we had back in October. Thank you very much for your kind comments. Enjoyed the presentation, and thank you so much. I really appreciate it. I'm happy you were here today. Okay, so Joe asked, which wide angle would you suggest for first one? Okay, so if it depends if you're on a crop sensor or on a full frame camera. So if you're on a crop sensor, I highly, highly recommend the Tokina 11 to 16 f2.8 lens. It's one of the best lenses for crop sensors. Something in that range. Definitely you want 11 or 12 millimeters for your wide angle to get that really profound grand landscape effect. Now if you're on a full frame, I recommend anything from 14 millimeters to 18 millimeters. My two favorite lenses that I shoot with are the Nikon 14 to 24 f2.8 and the Nikon 18 to 35 lens. And the reason I like those two lenses is the wideness, the dramatic perspective of the 14 to 24 and the image quality. And the 18 to 35 is great because it's razor sharp, it's light, it's relatively inexpensive for a high performance lens, and it's something that I can take hiking with me very, very easily because it weighs about a pound less, I think, than that big 14 to 24. So I'd recommend those ranges for you. Okay, what filters do you recommend for a first-time purchase? And the next person also said, let's talk about filters. As I mentioned earlier, yes, 10-stop ND, a 6-stop ND, polarizing filter. Actually, a polarizing filter is probably the first filter that you should buy. And once you learn how to use that and how it affects the exposure of your camera, then you can think about getting those other filters. I do not recommend UV filters. Absolutely not. I have not used a UV filter in over 6 or 7 years, and I am careful enough with my gear that I never scratch the front elements. But the problem with the UV filter is you basically have this amazing high quality lens that you're putting a cheap piece of glass over, and you're you're diminishing your image quality by doing that. And additionally, the more glass that you have between a light source and your camera, the more chance you have for reflections, ghosts, dust spots, smudges, smears, all kinds of stuff. So get rid of the UV filter, use it as a coaster, polarizer, and 10-stop, 6-stop ND filters. And personally, for my 10-stop and 6-stop, I like the square drop-in filters because they're easy to take on and take off. When you're screwing a filter on, it's way too easy to bump your focus, bump your zoom, screw up your composition. The 10-stops, they just snap on, or the square ones, they snap on. I really like those. Okay, how should I set the screen brightness for photo editing? So Anna, I assume you're talking about your computer monitor, and what I recommend is that you get a calibration tool like this one. I use what's called a Spider Pro, and what this does is it calibrates your monitor to a known standard, and it will determine the brightness and the color and all that stuff for you, so you don't have to worry about it. And that way you know you're editing your photos to a known standard that's going to agree with other photographers who have calibrated monitors. It's going to agree with printers who use calibrated print profiles and things like that. Okay, do you always use a tripod? Not always. I love to scout without a tripod because tripods are clunky. And I shoot a lot of telephoto stuff without a tripod because it's easier just to whip around and shoot quickly. But for serious landscape work, yes, I'm always on a tripod. And the reason for that is because it minimizes handshake. Because, I mean, you guys can see I'm very stable. So when I'm shooting, I don't make any movements, but it minimizes handshake, it minimizes button push when you're pushing the camera, it minimizes mirror slap, and the most important thing though about using a tripod is it allows for consistency. And consistency is really important because if you're trying to dial in parts of your photograph, you have a lot of variables to deal with, right? Your aperture, your shutter speed, your white balance, your composition, and each of those things can be affected. So you go, okay, let me adjust my shutter speed. Oh, that's not quite right. Let me look down and adjust this, and then come back and adjust my composition, and go down and adjust this and come back up. So if you're trying to optimize each of those individual variables, if you have something to hold your camera steady so that it's the same shot to shot to shot, then that is an incredible advantage over really fine tuning and getting the best possible photo. Okay. Oh, this is great. We have a chat going on here. We have Jim Seward talking to Gail. They were both on our New Zealand trip last year. Oh, that's so great. It's nice to hear from you guys. Okay, let's see. Where did that next question go? Where did you go? Where did you go? Where did you go? Ba-da-doo-doo-doo-doo-doo. Okay. Oh, it's way back up here. You guys are asking a ton of questions. You totally rock. Let's see here. How much time have we got? Oh, I'm sorry. I forgot to give you guys a heads up. We're running out of time on the coupon codes there. Um, but if you didn't get in and you wanted to the extra special fast action bonus, just send me an email. We'll work it out. It's all good. So I'll extend that for let's say another hour. So 2 p.m. California time. If you send me an email, if you didn't get in and you want that fast action bonus, send me an email in the next hour before 2 p.m. California time, and I will make sure that you get it. Okay? So you can, in the meantime, just enroll. Use the other coupon code, webinar 36 or bronze 36 or whatever you want to use, and then I'll make sure that you get all the bonuses. That's fine. Okay, boy, oh boy, here we go. Oh man, there's so many questions. So I'm going to have to ask you guys at this point, I think, to stop submitting questions because there's about 100 in here in the pool right now. So let me go through. I'm going to try to find some that I think will be relative to everybody. Okay, here's a great question from Sean. If you have to stop down to f16 or f22, do you have to deal with diffraction? Okay, so I didn't have time to mention that in the webinar, but one of the problems, the more you stop your lens down, the softer the details in your photo get because of something called diffraction. So as the iris of your lens, your aperture gets smaller and smaller, light that goes through that lens diffracts, right? And it moves. The smaller that opening is, the more that light diffracts and the softer the images get. So my rule of thumb is I always want to use the smallest f number that gives me the depth of field that I want. And so if I can shoot at f8, that's awesome. F11 is okay. F16, yeah, I'll shoot there if I have to get depth of field. And F22, I try to avoid it if I can. Now that being said, for me, artistic intent is much more important than technical perfection. And so, for example, if I need to go to F22 to get everything in focus and also to target a specific shutter speed, I will do that. That's totally fine for me. I don't mind losing a little bit of sharpness. So that's how I deal with diffraction. Do you recommend a fixed focal length wide angle or a zoom? Well, a fixed focal length will certainly help you develop your creativity more because it forces you to move around and forces you to solve problems. So, for example, I shot with a 14mm prime for years, and it forced me to move myself into position as opposed to moving the camera into position with the zoom lens. So that's a great way to develop your skills. Now I use the zoom, the 14 to 24, but I find that I still almost always use it at 14mm. So I think you can't really go wrong either way you cut it. Okay, is the 16mm from a 16 to 200 good enough for wide angle shots? Yes, so if you're talking about a super zoom lens, a 16 to 200mm lens, if that's a full frame lens, then yes, that is good. That's a beautiful ultra wide lens. In fact, it only gets wider than that with specialty lenses like the 14 to 24 for Nikon or the 11 to 24 for Canon, so that's fine. So is it possible to capture these epic landscapes with a crop sensor camera? Yes, it is. Absolutely. In fact, about half of the photos that I showed you guys today I took with a Nikon D7000, which is an APS-C camera. And I shot a lot of those with an 11mm, 11 to 16mm, or 12 to 24mm zoom. So absolutely, it is. Absolutely. Technique is so much more important than your gear. So another course question, if you enroll, how long is the material available? A lifetime access. Do you prefer using GNDs or exposure blending? I think I went over that already, more or less. I like to do a single exposure if I can, and then I'll do the adjustments in post. But overall, I probably prefer exposure blending now because it produces a little bit of a cleaner result, especially if you have a really complex topography, mountains, something like that. Okay, what about using a fisheye wide lens for a landscape photo? Oh man, I'm going to answer that question even though it's not relevant to a lot of people because I had to do that in 2017 when Nikon hired me to shoot the demo photos for their fisheye lens, and I had to learn how to shoot wide angles or shoot landscapes with a fisheye lens. And at first, I found it really frustrating, but then I loved it. In fact, if you go to my website, it's just joshuacripps.com, do a search for fisheye. You will see a whole article that I wrote about that process and how I ended up shooting landscapes with a fisheye lens. Okay, so when you take portrait format. Okay, so Anna, this is a great question. She asked, when you take portrait format, vertically oriented photos with a wide angle lens, are you rotating the camera or are you shooting landscape and cropping? So I always rotate like this. I want that full frame effect, especially with a wide angle. When you do the vertical, it brings your foreground right up to you. It gives you just incredible impact. So rotate the camera for sure. Okay, for maximum bringing. Okay, yes, we have access to the course forever, 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 and ever. We'll be going over exposure blending. Yes. So, exposure blending, I talked about this a little bit. Exposure blending, when you have movement in the scene, is tricky. So for that reason, I really like still using grad filters when I'm shooting at the ocean. Okay. Boom, boom, boom. A lot of questions, you guys. You rock here. Okay. Okay. Vince asks, taking my first trip to the Eastern Sierra this year. Any places you would recommend? Oh my God, you can't go wrong, man. You just can't go wrong. Is the sound still coming out? Hold on a second. Okay, great. It is. It's working. Fantastic. So, Vince is coming to the Eastern Sierra. The answer is just pick a canyon. It really doesn't matter which one. Well, right now, oh boy, there's a lot of snow. There is a lot of snow up here, you guys. So wait until July maybe before you come up. That's actually peak wildflower season. It's also peak mosquito season, which is not super fun, but it's peak thunderstorm season. So it's actually my favorite time of year to shoot in the Sierra is early July. And at that time of year, all you got to do, pick a canyon. So there are, I don't even know how many. There's dozens of canyons, and they all have roads that go up into them. So, for example, the Lakes Basin here in Mammoth is one. Lee Vining Canyon. There's Lundy Canyon. There's Virginia Lakes Canyon. There is Big Pine Creek Canyon. There's Bishop Creek Canyon. Just pick any of those. Little Lakes Valley. It's called Rock Creek. Just drive the road to the end. You can't go wrong. I mean, the scenes you will find are breathtaking. They're easy to locate. You just drive up the road and you'll see a million things that you want to photograph. So have a great time. Okay, let's see where we go from there. Okay, alrighty. Are you using Lightroom online now or still desktop? For most of my editing, I use the desktop version. But because I travel so much, what I like to do is create collections that automatically sync to Lightroom CC so that when I'm on travel, I can just use I can grab my iPad and I can do edits there, or I can also edit with my laptop on the road. That makes it really easy so I don't have to bring a hard drive with all my photos everywhere. Talking about adding pop, are you doing mostly broad contrast saturation changes, or you do more dodging and burning? So if I've got a good exposure across my grand landscape photograph, then I find that a broad adjustment, an S-curve on the curves adjustment for the whole photo works beautifully. I might do some local adjustments just to tune some areas up, but the incredible amount of dodging and burning that people are doing through Photoshop, through luminosity masks, through things like that, I almost never do that. I don't have a problem with it. I think it's a cool tool in the right situation. But for me, I just don't use it that much. I really like to go out and experiencing these amazing moments, capture them, and then do a simple adjustment to let the landscape kind of tell the story. And of course, I'll bring out the things that I want the viewer to see here and there, but I do find that broad adjustments for me work 95% of the time. Okay. Oh yeah, so Clickety Click says trying to sign up for webinar 36 but getting the discount that's the same as the 15 option. That's correct. It's the same discount off the course, but it comes with a different bonus. So the 15-minute fast action bonus, which I decided to extend till 2 o'clock. In fact, I can do that right now. Let me just extend the time that it's good for in the back end of my course here. You guys gonna watch me looking stupid now as I try to figure out how to do this. Okay, so I'm gonna change this till 2 p.m. So the bronze course, I can't edit this. Apparently I can't edit this. I don't know why. All right, yeah, okay. Another frustration coming from the coupon codes here on this platform. But just send me an email. Yeah, that's the best way to do it. All right, perfect. Yeah, thanks for chiming in, guys, on that. 15 is a better option with more bonuses. Yeah, so at this point, the webinar 15 code is actually invalid because it was expiring at 1 o'clock. But because we ran a little long and a lot of people, we had some trouble getting the coupons to work, I'm going to extend it till 2 o'clock if you send me an email. So here's what you should do. Sign up for the course using the other coupon code, the 36, webinar 36 code, and then send me an email at Joshua Cripps. You guys should have that email because you've been getting all the webinar contact information from me. Just reply to any of those emails and say, hey, I was on the webinar. I really wanted the 15-minute fast action bonus, but I couldn't get the coupon code to work, and I'll make sure that I add you to the pool that gets those bonuses. Does that make sense? Cool. Yes, perfect. Thank you guys for helping everybody understand what's going on. Is it possible to get reasonable results with a 12 megapixel camera? Yes, absolutely it is. I shot with a Nikon D300 and a D300S for years. They were 12 megapixels. I have a 45-inch wide metal print in my living room from a 12 megapixel camera that looks awesome. So it's really about getting high quality lenses and really understanding technique that is going to produce the best results for you. Getting good raw files in the field, maximizing the data quality, and actually I talk about in the course, and the 10 Techniques course, how can you maximize the data quality that you're getting into your camera so that you get the best possible results in post-processing. So you want to maximize that data quality, and then you can do a lot with those files. Okay. Okay. Any upcoming speaking engagements? Yeah. So this year, here's what I've got. I just spoke for Nikon at the Consumer Electronics Show back in January, and you can actually still watch that talk on their website. I forget what the URL is, but if you I think you can go to the Nikon YouTube page. Go to Nikon USA YouTube and do a search for CES, and you can find me giving a talk there. I think I'm actually wearing the same shirt. Anyway, you can find that there. I will be speaking in November at the Nature Visions in I think it's in Washington, D.C. or near Washington. I think it's in Bethesda, maybe. So I'll be speaking at that. That's November 1st through the 3rd. And that's all I've got on the calendar right now that I can remember. But for sure, all my engagements go out in my newsletter. So when I've got something coming up, I'll put it out there. Same with workshops and any tours and events that are coming up. So, okay, let's see here. What is your favorite season to photograph seascapes in the Santa Cruz area? Okay, that's really easy question. October through March. That is the best time. That's when all the storms are rolling through. That's when you get the most dramatic conditions, the prettiest sunset, and the biggest, poundiest waves. Just be careful because people do die at those beaches every year from getting swept off rocks. Not photographers typically, it's generally like drunk beachgoers, but I personally have been in a lot of close calls, so please be careful out there. Okay. Do-do-do-ba-da-bow. All right, you guys, let's take another 10 minutes. Does anybody have any follow? There's a lot of people have dropped off. There's about 50 of us left on here. If there's a couple more questions, I'll take those for the next 10 minutes, and then I'm going to wrap it up. So go ahead and put those questions in. If not, I am going to just sing a little bit like this until somebody puts a question in. And if there aren't any questions, I'm gonna close this out. You're very welcome, you guys. Oh, wide angle for the A6300. Okay, here we go. Now the questions are rolling in. Just had to poke a little bit, poke the bear. I'm sure I was gonna regret this. All right, so a wide angle for the A6300. To be honest with you, boy, I just don't know a lot about the Sony lineup. So I would hesitate to give you a gear recommendation because I'm not familiar with. Ask me anything about Nikon stuff, and I can tell you exactly what. But the Sony stuff, I just don't know it. So I would recommend a website like DxOMark. They do lens testing, and they can recommend a bunch of wide-angle stuff. Okay, so how do I clean my lenses assuming no UV filter? Ah, great question. I use these Kim wipes from Kimtech. They're called Delicate Task Wipers. This whole box costs $10, has 140 of these wipes. You can reuse them over and over and over. These are fantastic. They work for getting salt spray off of your camera. They work for getting water off of your camera, dust. The other thing I use is a rocket blower to get all the big particles off. Then I use one of these. If I have really stubborn stuff, I'll use some lens cleaning fluid. So that's how I do it. These work great, especially when shooting at the ocean. They get that salt spray right off. All right. Okay, do I offer mentoring outside of the current course? I don't currently offer anything like that. This is actually my first time doing that, and I really want to see how it works out in the course. That's why some of the tiers, like the gold tier, only has 3 spots available, because I want to make sure that the people who enroll there get my 100% of my attention and time. And if I offer too many spaces for mentoring, I'm not going to be able to offer that. So I'm going to see how this goes, and if it goes well, then I might launch some kind of mentoring program in the future. Okay, let's see here. A good mirrorless camera for landscapes. Yeah, absolutely. Any of the current generation mirrorless cameras is awesome. Where did I put this thing? I'm actually shooting right now with this guy, which is the new Nikon Z7. So this has the same specs as the Nikon D850 in it. It's an amazing, amazing camera. I'm not sure if I can find it. The image quality of this thing is incredible, but it's tiny and it's lightweight. I don't have my 850 on hand at the moment, otherwise I'd show you the size comparison. But this thing is tiny and it's beautiful and it's wonderful. But any of the current mirrorless cameras is going to be fantastic for shooting landscapes. All right, can you explain where your focal point should be? Yeah, so you want to start, when you're shooting a grand landscape, you divide the frame into thirds. So you can imagine if this was a grand landscape, you divide the frame like this. So you've got a tic-tac-toe board, and you put that focal point, the starting focal point, about right here, about 1/3 of the way up from the bottom of the frame. Okay, and then that's when you want to go to live view and then check your foreground and your background. And I realize we blazed through that part of the webinar today really, really fast. There's a full lesson on that in the 10 Techniques course with an actual demo and a flow chart and a process and exactly how to do that. But if you start about a third of the way up from the bottom of the frame, that's a really, really good place to begin. Okay, what are the bonus items inclusive with Webinar 15? That is the Lightroom Develop course, Master Raw Processing, Lightroom, all the case studies, 5 individual case studies. There is a bleh, you guys haven't talked this much in a long time, a Flickr Pro account. So that's $69, $69, $50, and then all of the recordings from the group mentoring session in the course. So that's 12 hours of group mentoring recordings. That's worth 400 bucks. So that in total, I think it's $688 worth of bonuses for the webinar 15, that fast action bonus. And again, just send me, if you enroll, the thing is you got to enroll in the course, then send me an email and let me know, I wanted that fast action bonus, but the coupon thing was goofy and weird and confusing, and I know, and I'm sorry. So just send me an email, we'll get it worked out. Okay, related to seascapes, have you ever had any gear damaged by saltwater? Oh my God, so much gear. Yeah, I've had cameras that no longer focus. I've had cameras that don't work with the shutter release. I've had, oh man, one time I got swept off my feet and I lost my phone, my iPod. A camera was actually fine from that one, but everything else died. But the main thing that I've had troubles with when shooting at the ocean is a tripod. Because there has so many moving parts, you really want to make sure after you've finished shooting at the coast that you rinse your tripod out thoroughly. Rinse out all the mechanisms, the locks. The locks are especially important to rinse out, but also the tripod head. Get that cleaned off. In fact, shooting at the beach is why I switched to using these tripods, these tripod heads, the Acratech heads, because they have no internal parts. So there's nothing to get stuck inside here. And that's how you can easily break a tripod head, by getting salt and sand inside of it. Okay, do you feel that the 14 to 24 Nikon lens's inability to install a filter on limits its use as a good landscape option? Boy, that's a great question. Oh, that is a constant dilemma in the landscape world, because you can get filters for that lens, but you have to have a special holder. The filters themselves are enormous. It's hard to even hold them. They're so big. They're expensive. They're bulky. They're easier to drop. So I personally don't have filters for that lens. And yeah, I struggle with that dilemma as well. It is an amazing landscape lens, but if you ever want to do long exposures with it, you have to either get that specialty filter kit, or like you said in your question, get a 16 to 35 millimeter lens that you can install a filter on. And actually, that's something that is really, really compelling about the new mirrorless cameras that are coming out, is they are able to create smaller lenses with the same equivalent focal length. So for example, Nikon came out with a 14 to 30 millimeter lens that has a flat front element. It's 82 millimeters, and you can install filters on that because of that. So yeah, what I do is something like you right now, because I don't have that lens. I have the Nikon 18 to 35, which is the F mount, and the 14 to 24, which is that big bulbous front end. And so whenever I'm shooting with filters, I shoot with that 18 to 35. But I'll probably pick up a 16 to 35 eventually for that same exact reason, for the filtering. Okay, let's see here. Adil from Sri Lanka. Hey man, how's it going? I've been following you on Instagram and you inspire me to snap landscape photo. Just 2 days, got back my camera, and this is my very first lesson. I wanted to ask, is the 18 to 55 lens, kit lens, suitable for landscape? Of course, any lens, every lens is suitable for landscape photography. Like I said, my favorite lens for landscape photography is the 70 to 200 f4. I love that lens because you can pick out parts of the scene. Now, the 18 millimeter lens, you're not going to get that big wide angle in your face look that you would with a 16 or a 14 millimeter lens. But if you don't have any other options, that's what you've got. So go shoot lenses, shoot landscapes with that, and eventually you'll realize where are the limitations. What do you want to accomplish that you can't do with that lens, and that'll tell you what lens to buy next. Okay, do I use hyperfocal distance? Not really, not anymore. Not now. Not every camera now has live view that makes focusing so easy because you can check critical focus manually by digitally zooming in on the foreground and the background and making adjustments either to your focus point manually or to your depth of field. And so I sort of have this empirical method now that I went through in the webinar. That helps me get critical focus without relying on hyperfocal. Okay, the picture taken in the background. Oh yeah, so that waterfall photo taken in the background of the webinar page is in New Zealand. It's a place called Stirling Falls. It is breathtaking. The only way to get there is on a boat. You guys should go. It's cool. It's really cool. Okay, about the Z7, do you use your F-mount lenses with it? Yes, absolutely. So I have the F to Z adapter that allows me to mount all of my F-mount lenses on the Z7. Does the adapter affect image quality? And the answer is no, because the adapter, let me find it really quick. Okay, so the adapter, here's what the adapter looks like on my 18 to 35 lens, but the adapter itself has no glass in it. It is just a hole that you can put things through. So there's nothing in here to interfere with the light transmission or anything like that. So it doesn't affect the image quality of those lenses, which is awesome. Okay, I'm planning to sell my landscape photos as metal prints. What is the most popular size wall print? That's a great question. All right, so before I get into that, let me just say thank you guys again for attending. Let me cut the questions off there. There's about 3 or 4 more that I'll get through, and then we'll call it a day. So if you're selling your prints as metal prints, the thing with metal is impact. Big, fat, in-your-face, wow images. So you don't want to print a metal print like this. And I personally don't sell a ton of prints, but I know a photographer who does, and he has said that the most popular sizes for metal prints are 24 by 36 and 30 by 45. So those larger sizes, because as much as people would love to display a 96-inch wide print, most people don't have room for that in their houses. So 24 by 36 is a great compromise between size and impact and actual display ability. So 24 by 36 and 30 by 45 are really good sizes. Okay. Can you pull off a grand landscape at night with moon or starlight, and will it be too soft? You can pull it off. So as long as you have some moon, you will have enough light to shoot a grand landscape. The main thing is you'll either, because you need depth of field, right? And so you need enough light that is like if you have a new moon and you're at f/16 and ISO 100, the exposure time takes something like 8 hours. So you can do it. I mean, it's just a matter of time, really. If you have like a crescent moon, that's really perfect. But what a lot of people will do if they want to shoot a night scene, what I do is I will shoot that scene at twilight, maybe an hour after sunset. So that means I'm at f/16, ISO 100, and maybe an exposure time of 4 minutes, 8 minutes. So that gives me this beautiful twilight exposure. And then as the stars come out, I'll take a star exposure and I'll blend them together later so that I'm not sitting there waiting 8 hours to get my good exposure on my foreground. Okay, so have I used the new Nikon Z14 to 30? Just played with it a little bit at CES, but the senior product manager loves it. I mean, he like bought one as soon as it came out, and he couldn't stop showing me photos on it. So like, look at this one, look at this one, look at this, is amazing. So once it's available, I'm definitely going to get one. The idea that you can have a 14mm lens that takes that's a flat front mount, takes filters, is insanely awesome in my opinion. So I'm definitely going to get one of those. Okay, last question. And it is a doozy. Oh my gosh. Any advice on starting a career in landscape photography? Yes. Focus. Oh boy, that's a huge question. honestly, you have to really think about what you're doing photography for, because when you start to turn your photography into a career, all of a sudden you get to do photography a lot less, because you have to work on the business, the marketing, the that side of things. And if you don't know that side of things, like I had no idea when I first got started, I knew nothing about business or marketing. I arguably still do not. Um, but you have to learn all that stuff in order to make it work as a business, and that's really hard. And so sometimes it's nice to keep photography just as a hobby because you get to enjoy it, just pure enjoyment, right? Like it's a Saturday, and I would love to be out shooting, or but I'm sort of I'm working, so to speak, right now, right? I'm doing the webinar. I'm trying to launch the course. I'm answering emails and questions and all kinds of, and I love to do that stuff. Don't get me wrong. I really love teaching and I really love helping people, but that's a part that comes with turning it into a career that you maybe don't expect. You have to do things that you didn't initially anticipate in order to make it work as a career. So you have to really decide, what do you want photography to be? Because now there's always a little bit of subtext to everything I do, right? When I'm on a photo trip for myself, I'm always thinking, hey, is there a way I can turn this trip into a tour down the road? Or how can I market this image? Or how can I use this photo for better social media presence? Or how can I do XYZ with it? Sometimes it's really beautiful just to say, hey, I just want to take a picture because I enjoy taking a picture. But if you really want to get into photography as a career, I mean, I love it. The freedom that you get, the chance to meet these people, the amazing people, and touch a lot of people and visit incredible places is awesome. That part is really, really fantastic. Um, and my advice would basically be, shoot the things that you love and get really, really good at that. Like get unarguably good at the things that you love, and figure out what you want to do, whether that's selling prints, teaching workshops, and figure out the business and marketing side of that. How are you going to go about doing that? Create a business plan, create a marketing plan, create an audience plan. How are you going to get your audience? And then be prepared for it to take a long time. I started this journey in 2008, but it took me 4 years to actually be 100% full time earning all of my money from photography. And it took me actually another 2 years after that. So we're talking 2014, where I was actually making enough money that I could travel and do fun stuff instead of just live as cheaply as possible and eat ramen while I waited for the next print order to come in. So yeah, and if you check out my website, go to the About page, and then go down to where there's an interview section, and I have an FAQ there. And every question I've ever been asked about my career, I put in that FAQ. So you can find your answers there as well. So, all right, yeah, it's 5 minutes till 3 a.m. in Sri Lanka. So yeah. Oh yeah, and I did actually take that picture. It's in Utah, an amazing place called Coyote Gulch. And okay, you guys, I've got to wrap it up now. I want to thank you all so much for coming today. I am in genuine disbelief that 1,000 people registered, and we had over 350 come to the webinar. We still have 42 of you guys hanging on here. It's been almost 3 hours. What's the matter with you? Don't you got better stuff to do? All right, you guys rock. I'm going to sign off. If you have any questions at all, send me an email. I'm always available to help as much as I can. If you got questions about the course, questions about the webinar, I'll be getting the replay link out sometime later today, as soon as I get that figured out. So thank you guys very much again. You rock. Enjoy the rest of your day, and happy light to you all.